Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So we'll just bring to order the meeting number 19 of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee. I would like to begin our meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered here on the traditional territories of Indigenous people who have occupied and been stewards of the land for thousands of years. The people who've been here before us have been the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I want to, as we begin all our meetings, by just recognizing those who are in the room, especially those who are sitting around the horseshoe as committee members. And today we are very pleased to be joined by two new members, and you'll get a chance to meet them very soon because they're going to have a moment to introduce themselves. But if I can just ask that we begin by just recognizing that we're here and start with our names and our titles. So I'm Kristen Wong-Tam, City Councillor and the chair of this committee. And to my right?
I'm Carol Kostonen with the City Clerk's Office.
Jonathan Conchera, City Clerk's Office.
Mike Layton, City Councillor, Ward 19, Trinity Spadina.
Wendy Porch, committee member.
Yin Brown, committee member.
Okay. Oh, Michael Michelli, new committee.
Monica Winkler, committee member.
Stephanie Osario, committee member.
Martin Crissells, committee member.
Darren Cooper, committee member.
Glenn Hart, new committee member.
Rahima Mullah, vice chair.
Deirdre Boyle, accessibility consultant.
Okay, wonderful. And if we can just go around the back rows as well to introduce staff.
Eric Jensen, Transportation Services.
Sean Dillon, Transportation Services, Acting Manager, Cycling Infrastructure and Programs.
I'm David Dunn. I'm with Transportation Services, Cycling Infrastructure and Programs.
Good morning. I'm Paul Raftis, General Manager of Shelter Support and Housing Administration.
Melissa Wong from Councillor Wong-Tam's office.
Matt Haig, Senior Planner, TTC.
Alex Hillman, Equity and Diversity.
We'll go to the side of the room.
Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Kivalo from the City Clerk's Office, and on her wonderful way, the most helpful. Yes.
Community support.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
Wonderful.
That was Lynn.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the time for the introductions. We're on the goldenrod sheets for the members that are here, and we will begin by asking if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, can I please have a mover to confirm the minutes of December 4th, 2017? Monica, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. I recognize that there may be some speakers on some of the items. We'll go through that as we review the order paper. So the first item on the agenda is DI 19.1, which is the chair's report. And we're going to hold that down because I will come back to deliver some remarks. DI 19.2 is the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee working groups. We're also going to hold that down because there will be verbal report backs from the committee members. D 19.3 is the 2018 Election Accessibility Plan. We're going to hold that for staff presentations. DI 19.4, Improving Accessibility in Shelters. Again, we'll hold that for staff presentations. DI 19.5, Accessibility, Bloor Street, Bike Lane, Shaw Street to Avenue Road. Again, we'll hold that down for staff presentations. DI 19.6, Accessibility at Construction Sites. Again, we'll hold that down for staff presentations. DI 19.7, Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee Outstanding 2017 Agenda Items. We will be holding that down for staff presentations. DI 19.8, City of Toronto Corporate Accessibility Policy. and there is a suggested recommendation that we adopt the recommendations in the report. Are there any are there any ones who wish to hold this particular item? And if there are none, if there's no questions of staff, we could probably proceed with it. Oh, I'm sorry. I've just been notified by clerk that we have a deputation that's a deputant that's registered to speak. So we're going to hold that down to hear from the speaker. Then moving along, DI 19.9, accessibility during construction, Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail Transit. And there is a suggestion from one of the transportation working groups. The recommendation is that we adopt the recommendations in the letter. Is there anyone who would like to speak to that item, or perhaps we may hear from the transportation group in reference to that? If not, we can move to adopt the recommendations in the letter now. Or should we hold that down or move to adopt? Okay, so Monica is moving to adopt the 19.9. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Okay, great. And we do have a request to add one new item of business to the agenda. And many of you would have received this last night by email. It's from the, it's around the Real-Trans appeals process. Can I please have a motion to add this new business to the agenda? Thank you very much, Wendy. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So that will be DI 19.10. Okay, so coming back to the top of the agenda, we'll begin with the chair's report. And I'd like to begin my remarks by welcoming our two brand new committee members. Glenn Hart and Michael Michelli had the opportunity of speaking with both of them. You will be very impressed with their credentials, and we're very, very pleased to have you join this particular committee for the balance of the term. I'm going to open the floor and invite Michael as well as Glenn to just give us a quick introduction to yourself. I thought it'd be best if it's said in your own words. Yeah. Michael, you want to go first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Michelli. I'm generally a man of few words. I hold a master's degree in critical disability studies from York University, and my focus of research was primarily prenatal genetic testing and the social and legal implications for people with disabilities, and I'm glad to be part of the committee. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Welcome. And Glenn.
Hello, everyone. As you just heard, my name's Glenn. I work in the HIV sector here in the city with supportive housing for people living with HIV, and in many cases with some other more invisible disabilities, such as mental health and addiction. And I'm so honored and proud to be here as somebody of more of a frontline worker, someone who also lives with HIV, concurrent mental health challenges from time to time. I'm glad to be here to represent those with disabilities that are not always seen as disability.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome, big welcome to both Michael and Glenn. We're very, very excited for your participation. So just going through the chair's report, I'm going to try to get through this very quickly, and I apologize. This one's probably one of my longer chair's report, but that's because we've had a big break and there's been a lot of activities. I want to make sure that you know what we've been up to and what my office has been up to. The accessibility parking permit issue, many of you have been following those discussions. I have been in conversation with Minister Tracy McCharles's office, and including a meeting that's going to be set up with the minister herself. And just as a reminder, she's the Minister of Government and Consumer Services, and she's also the minister responsible for accessibility. Just by way of background, the early conversations have been the province noting that Toronto is the only municipality with extremely generous provisions for accessibility parking permits, which has resulted in Toronto being more prone to abuse of these permits and significant number of complaints relating to the use of these permits, such as parking in permitted areas for extended periods of time. I spoke to the minister staff about how do we curb the abuse of these permits, and at the same time continue to make accommodations for individuals in our city, and we're trying to strike some balance. The staff will be reporting back in the next term, this is the city staff, regarding the changes that are being made provincially to the permit system, and Toronto will need to consider how to update our program so that it can address those existing concerns, and those concerns, of course, are the abuse of the permit program, including perhaps fraudulent use of the permits. So the Sidewalk for All's update, many of you were active and involved with that campaign as we were trying to set out new regulations in the city on how wide those sidewalk minimum widths should be in terms of the pedestrian clearway. There is a report back from staff that will be in the new term of council. I think what's not clear right now as the chair, as we try to chase this particular file down the City Hall corridors, is when will the report be coming back? There has been a request from the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association, who was very active in the Sidewalks for All Coalition, who is interested in asking the executive committee to request and direct staff to set up a specific report back date. So we're not going to be languishing on and on and on without any final report date. And they're also in requesting that the city staff utilize the summer months to investigate the items requested in the December 4th meeting, which is the meeting that ended up deferring this report out into the future. So I will most likely be moving a motion specifically from this committee to respond to the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association to do just that. There is upcoming consultations that you should all be aware of, and the first one is regarding the poverty reduction strategy, and there will be a presentation to our committee. The staff since March the 12th, they've been holding panel discussions related to poverty reduction. This is city staff. The next session is Tuesday, April the 23rd. The topic I know is of great interest to many of you is housing stability. The location and time is City Hall in the Rotunda between 6 to 9 p.m. Please RSVP for this event and to request child minding or ASL interpretation, and staff will be here. City staff will be here to report to this committee in June. TO Corps is also putting together the final open house, and this is, of course, the large downtown waterfront secondary plan. Is a very important document, and TO Corps is the initiative to prepare that new plan for downtown Toronto. In addition to a series of 5 infrastructure-related strategies that have been developed to implement the plan over the categories of community facilities, parks and public realm, mobility, energy, and water. Those have been the core issues and the focus of the TO Corps review. This new downtown secondary plan is a 25-year vision that sets out the direction for the city as a cultural, civic, retail, and economic heart of Toronto, and also a wonderful place, a great place to live. The TO Corps secondary plan hopes to direct where appropriate scale and growth will go into the future to ensure that Toronto continues to build complete neighborhoods. So there is a proposed amendment to the official plan. This is a very big undertaking. It's significant. It will most likely go through an OMB review, or at least the LPAT review. And so the final open house out of many public consultations is happening on April 23rd. For some reason, it's the same time as the poverty reduction open house, but this one will take place at Metro Hall in the Rotunda, and the official plan amendment, which is the product that TO Corps will come back into City Hall as, is going to the Planning and Growth Management Committee on May the 1st, and the public is welcome to attend, as well as committee members if you want to come out to speak in support of TO Corps. And because accessibility and mobility is a big piece of it, we want to make sure that that stays in there and makes it to the final outcome. Changing lanes, there's a laneway housing report. There's an opportunity for you to provide some input. This is going to the May 2nd TEYCC agenda. The report recommends the official planning zoning bylaw amendments specific to the Toronto and East York area to permit laneway housing. So this will be secondary, subordinate, and accessory rental dwellings, which will be on the same lot as an existing house. And there is an official plan amendment that will be attached. And a few points that are of noted interest to this committee is that the laneway suites are intended to contribute to the increasing supply of rental housing in the city's neighborhoods. I know that's a big issue for us. The proposed amendments will help implement recent provincial direction to support the construction of secondary units. There has been a significant interest in the public about laneway suites into the community, and several large format community meetings have been hosted. City staff have spent time with individual residents associations to help with the development of these amendments. A pilot project is proposed to incentivize up to 20 laneway suites as affordable rental. And in the city of Vancouver, which is years ahead of us with respect to this particular subject, they have demonstrated that it can be done larger citywide. Why this is of interest to us is that if these laneway suites are created and accommodated, we of course hope that they will be built with all the physical accessibility accommodations. And so we want to make sure that our voices are heard there. And finally, there is probably information that will be of interest to the committee still, that this report speaks to, and that's again the laneway piece, that speaks to new grade-related laneway suites that can be more easily and cost-effectively designed to meet the building code criteria. So all the times that developers and homeowners and building owners have said it's cost prohibitive, it can't be done, here's an opportunity to layer an additional accessibility lens over something the city is actively pursuing. And this, of course, will demonstrate that construction can be met and it can be cost effective and it will meet the building code's barrier-free requirements. And that will then, of course, translate and it can be transferred to other homes, primary homes as well. That was long. I want to thank Yin for bringing a few of those items to my attention, and that's one of the reasons why we're discussing that today. I see hands going up, so there must be questions of the chair's report. I'll acknowledge Yin first, and then Monica second.
I really want to support a motion from you, Councillor, on sort of making sure that the further research survey on the outdoor cafes, that there be a specific deadline, and that, as you said, we want the research to be done this summer. Similarly, I would really like to support, as you mentioned, that bringing in the poverty reduction strategy people to come in for sure in the June meeting, because we don't know what will happen after that. And as I understand it, they have already most of their meetings are done, and I sense that there has been very little consideration of the disability community, and I was really disappointed in that the very first one on employment, where there's an extensive initiative called the community benefits, and where construction project supported by the city, such as Metrolinx, possible U of T, Scarborough campus. I just don't see any panel of the partnerships have any consideration for the disability community. So similarly, transportation, housing, and the service coordination, all these areas we have not really given an input. So it's very important that they do come in next meeting. And to the last point about the laneway suites, I don't know how all the details, and I don't know they're reporting to what is it, May 1st, you said? I wonder, would it be easier if they come in also to our meeting in June to explain to us the accessibility components of this initiative?
Great. Thank you very much, Yin. Monica?
Yeah, I would like clarification on the date and place of the Changing Lanes Laneway Housing Report meeting.
Yes, so the report will be published with the May 2nd Toronto East Shore Community Council agenda. We're happy to send you the link so you can actually have access to the link when that report goes live.
Right.
But that's where it's heading.
And the opportunities to provide input, is there a meeting?
That is the meeting.
That's the meeting.
That
okay.
is the meeting date.
Okay.
You can also, and we'll also send you the contact information to the senior planner who's actually drafting the report. His name is Craig Ewens. And Greg is the primary contact for Changing Lanes. So we'll make sure all that information is sent out to the committee members.
Thank you.
Okay. And Yin, with respect to the motion around accelerating the work or requesting staff to accelerating the work on sidewalks for all, we will move that motion when we come to item number 7. Okay, so thank you very much for the indulgence of time. That was probably one of the longest reports I've had. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on Yin's comment regarding asking for the folks around the poverty reduction strategy to come in and talk to the TAC committee. Is that something that you can make a motion on? As Yin has expressed, I think also, there seems to be very little kind of cross-consideration between the committee and the poverty reduction strategy today, and I really think that the input from this committee, considering the poverty rates that people with disabilities are living with, would be quite important. So I just wanted to raise that and make sure we could address that.
Yeah, no, and absolutely it is important. Just by way of clarification, the city staff who are tasked with that report will be presenting and coming before our committee at our June meeting. Yeah, so they will be here. If there are no other questions or comments, then I will move that we adopt the chair's report. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So now we'll head over to the working group report backs, and we will hear from, sorry, just getting back to my agenda. So that brings us to item number 2. If I can have a representative from the Communications Working Group, who's here to report back on that issue? Darren.
Thank you, Chair. The Communications Working Group has not met since our last meeting, so I don't have anything to report at this time. However, we will be meeting before our next meeting, so I'll have a fuller report at the June meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. Appreciate that. Employment Working Group. That's, I believe, Wendy. Go ahead.
The committee hasn't met since the last presentation.
Okay. So then we'll hear from you at the next meeting.
Yes, we will. We have been trying to meet. In fact, just speaking from my own perspective, we have, I've reviewed, we have sort of individually reviewed the presentation that we were given. We do actually still think that there are a number of things that have not been addressed or answered in that presentation. And at the last meeting, we did pass that motion that asked for them to consult with us before anything moves forward. So we're looking forward to working with HR on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Wendy. The Housing Working Group,
That's Terry Lynn.
and Terry Lynn is our lead. I also recognize that Joe is here, and as well as Rahima. I have some remarks from Terry Lynn. Is there anything, I could read it, and if there's anything that's missing, you can also add to it. Should we do that? Okay, so the Housing Working Group is looking for additional members to join the team. So for those who have extra time who want to join one more working group, the Housing Working Group wants your participation and leadership. And currently, you can, their next working group meeting is April the 26th from 6:30 to 8:30, and you get to join the dynamic team of Terry Lynn Langdon, Rahima Mola, and Joe Napper. Okay, so, and that will bring us to the Transportation Working Group. And Monica?
Sorry, I didn't know you were going to finish that.
That's okay. You chew carefully.
Okay. The motion that we already passed was really the only thing that was discussed at our meeting, our most recent meeting. And but things have come up since then. On Monday, there was a Wheel-Trans 10-year strategy meeting for stakeholders. I thought it went very well. They have some very interesting ideas coming up. And I know that there's a motion coming, oh no, that's for the appeals process. I would love to have them come in and do a presentation to us because there's a lot of good information in here and I don't think we have a lot of time for me to go through it all. But basically the important bits is that there's been a marked increase in usage. The family of services pilot has coming to an end and they're preparing to introduce it more extensively onto the fixed TTC system. The pilot apparently went very well and it will, they had said very, very firmly in the meeting that it will not be mandatory. If you need door-to-door service, you will get door-to-door service, period. But they're trying to help people try all the different services that are available. They are working on a revision of several policies and introducing new policies, which we all stood up and cheered for because the policies are outdated. And the biggest change that you will have recognized if you use Wheel-Trans is the cancellation policy changes. And that has been very well received and has made it less, they're coming from a non-penalizing system to a flexible system to help people out. There are new things that are being introduced this spring sometime, so I'll say up to June 21st. They're introducing a new telephone system, which will decrease the waiting time. They're offering a callback option where you don't have to sit on the phone for a half an hour, which I did yesterday. So you can actually go on about your business and not worry about being tied to the phone. And they are looking at mobile options for scheduling. That's coming 2019-ish time. I know there's been some complaints about the new vehicles. I just want to say I love the new vehicles, but everybody has their own issues and stuff. And they said that after the new 80 of the new vehicles have been purchased, they will then once again look for a different style vehicle. They're trying to have lots of options available. So basically the most important stuff is that this year their focus is on new policies, new telephone system, and travel training, which is a pilot they're trying and teach people how to use the system on a one-to-one or group basis, which is awesome. In 2019, they're going to continue modernization of the scheduling system and such. In 2020, that's when they're hoping to be fully integrated with the fixed route TTC, which is the family of services. So that's that goal. And then obviously in 2025, due to the AODA, the entire TTC system has to become fully accessible. So that will be as well. A couple of things that they're looking at is real-time sensors for elevators, so that if you're being brought to a subway station on the family plan, on the family of services, and the signal comes out, elevator's not working, then they will discuss at that moment if they take you to a different subway station or if they take you directly to where you want to go. I really think anybody who is using Wheel-Trans should make it out to one of these meetings because Presto will be there, the community bus people will be there. The community bus is very little known in the city and it needs to be known more. It's designed around, they've looked at the map of Toronto based on where older people live, so retirement housing, et cetera, and they develop routes where the bus runs every hour and you just have to flag it down. It costs a TTC fare, so if you have a Metro Pass or if you have a token or a ticket or whatever, and it stops at the doors of shopping centers, doctor's offices, hospitals, and some seniors' homes. So it's meant to be more of a neighborhood system. There are 5 in place right now. 2 have been piloted to be extended. One is in East York, the other one is up in Etobicoke, and there'll be lots of information given about that. So the next meetings, unfortunately, the one downtown was last night. So, but Etobicoke is on April 24th, Scarborough is on April 25th, North York has both an afternoon and an evening on April 30th, and I don't know how to get this, I believe this is somewhere on the website, I'm not sure, but it was also sent to all of us by email, this little flyer. And that's where you'll see the full presentation. If anybody wants to look at it after the meeting, that's great. Or you can call 416-393-3792 and talk to Mitch, and he will give you more information about these sessions. One other thing that Terry Lynn asked me to bring forward is just to make sure that everybody is aware that the City of Toronto's Fair Pass discount program for the TTC is in place. If you go on the City of Toronto website, it's on /transit discount, and on the TTC website, it's Fair Pass discount program. And apparently there are massive reductions for people who are who don't have a lot of money but require the services of the TTC. So that's another piece of information that came through after the report was sent in. And I believe that is it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Monica, for all your work and the work of the committee. The next working group is the Disability and Policing Working Group. Our lead there is Terry Lynn. And I also recognize that Terry Lynn had initiated a conversation which hasn't gone too far, but I think you probably know that there's an interest in planning a disability and policing forum. Hot issue, very important issue, one issue that this group will not shy away from, and I don't believe there has been an adequate space or a forum convened for that honest dialogue. So that's something that Terry Lynn and her working group is interested in working on, and I will pledge my support as the chair to provide some resources to make that happen. So stay tuned for that one. So those are the reports from all the different working groups. Can I get a motion to receive it for information? Glenn, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Wonderful. So now we're heading to DI 19.3, 2018 election accessibility plan. I think we could probably hear from the deputant first. There is one registered speaker, Emily Daigle. Welcome. Yeah. Is this no, this is number. Emily, when you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes. Set your clock.
Hello. Sorry about all that. So I just wanted to say I've worked the election several times. I've worked 21 elections in my lifetime, federal, provincial, municipal. And last election, I actually got to be an accessibility, I call it an accessibility officer at Metro Hall. It was a very busy location with a lot of people, and at the end of the night, we had a lineup going all the way around the inside of Metro Hall. And the biggest problem with some of the, and I heard it from a lot of my friends who either worked the election or actually went out to vote, who were in wheelchairs and legally blind, and people with service dogs. And the biggest complaint I've heard is that there were certain poll clerks that wouldn't deal with people with guide dogs. That was one thing I was hearing, especially in Scarborough, and we had that problem at our location as well at one point. Number two is that the accessible entrances to some locations either were not properly signed or the buttons were not working or had not been turned on. I know at Metro Hall, there are 2 entrances definitely that are buttoned, that have buttons, and one of them was shut off all day and locked. And we had to go beg security to open it twice because I relocked it on shift change. And at the end of the night, there was people that couldn't get out very easily to get their wheel-trans because the doors locked at 9 o'clock. So we kind of had fun with security trying to get that door done. But the other thing is, I want to work for the elections and I want to do accessibility stuff again, but the one problem I'm having is that some of the staff at the that are working the advanced voting day, some of the people that are working those days, and this is one problem that we had with a couple of my friends in Scarborough who are deafblind, they actually could not vote on their own. They had to get the DRO to help them because the magnifiers that are used are not strong enough for some visually impaired. But the other problem is some of the braille that's being used, the paper braille, is being crushed. So what I mean by that, and Darren will know exactly what I mean, is when you print braille on a braille printer, there's only a certain raised dot, and it's easily crushable where you can't feel the dots very well. So you'll feel part of the braille and then part of it. If those people have neuropathy like I do, you won't be able to feel part of the other braille. And that was what some of my friends were having problems with. And that's about it, and thank you. And I'll see you in a few minutes.
Thank you, Emily, for your remarks. Are there any questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Emily. There are no other speakers, so I'm going to invite staff to come to the front of the room. We'll have you set up for the presentation. Okay, I think that would be fine. You can stand or you can sit. Oh, okay. Yeah, standing desks are kind of cool.
Here. So good morning, everyone. My name is Fiona Murray, and I'm the Deputy City Clerk of Elections, and I'm here today with two of my colleagues, Carol Boganam and John Maraglia, and we're very pleased to be here to talk about our accessibility plan for the 2018 election. Before I start my presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the concerns that the deputant raised. We weren't aware of some of those, so now that we are, I'll certainly make sure that we address those. And I think, you know, in terms of the guide dogs at polling stations, I think that becomes a bit of a training issue. We have to hire almost 18,000 election staff for election day. So we do almost 1,200 training programs through a 2.5-month period of time. So we'll make sure that we really stress that. And the crush braille makes sense to me. I mean, we have so many supplies that we have to receive and distribute to so many locations. I can totally understand that that could get crushed at times. So we'll make sure that we transport those in a better way. The magnifiers, we've been looking at some better magnifiers for 2018. So my hope is that they would be stronger to address the concern you raised. And then the buttons not being turned on, again, that should never have happened. So I'm happy that you've raised that with us today. So before I started, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context of the breadth and scope of Toronto's election. We're the 4th largest municipal election in North America. We're just behind Mexico City, Los Angeles, and New York. And we're larger than 9 out of our 13 provinces and territories. We're absolutely huge. Elections and by-elections in Toronto are administered under the Municipal Elections Act, and the Municipal Elections Act provides quite a bit of independence and discretion to the city clerk to administer the elections. So one of the most important priorities of our city clerk is making our elections accessible, and that's been one of her priorities for a number of years, and we've worked diligently over the last 3 to 4 elections to really look at reducing and addressing barriers to voting for people with disabilities. In 2010, the MEA, for the first time, required clerks across Ontario to prepare a formalized plan around identifying and removing barriers and making that available to the public before Election Day. This is our 3rd accessibility plan, and I understand that we presented to this committee in 2013 around our plan for 2014. So we posted our plan on our website last week. It's available, and I think there's a link in the presentation right at the bottom of this slide. And our plan is essentially it's a living and breathing document that we're constantly looking at, improving, and asking people to provide input on. So I would really encourage everybody to go take a look, and if you've got any input for us, we're certainly open to hearing that. So today I'm going to provide a really quick overview of our plan. It's kind of organized into 6 key areas: consultations, communication and information, voting places, voting options, assistance to candidates, and accessible customer service. So the first area, public consultation, we really recognize the importance and value of having a really collaborative process and we've developed a variety of mechanisms in order to do that. One of our key mechanisms is our Accessibility Outreach Network. And that network has over 60 members, including people with disabilities, accessibility advocates, and representatives from a variety of community organizations. And they really allow us to tap in and get firsthand, real lived experience with the electoral process to help us identify where those barriers exist so that we can address them. They also help us reach people from diverse disabilities. They disseminate our information around how to vote, where to vote, employment opportunities, etc. In 2015, we also developed 3 working groups to do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the issues that we were hearing about in order that we could collaborate with them on ways that we could address the issues and help us better meet the objectives of our plan. We also sometimes conduct special consultations. So to give you an example of that, for the 2018 election, we've done a really deep dive on our ballot, and we're looking at redesigning it for the 2018 election. We held a number of focus groups with people with disabilities and disability organizations to get some input and feedback on how to design it and improve the access of it. Then we hired an accessibility consultant who also took a look and gave us some feedback. So my hope is that our ballot is improved in terms of meeting the needs of people with diverse disabilities. Communication and information. So we try to provide our election information in a wide variety of formats to ensure that we're meeting diverse audiences. So that includes our website, mail-outs, radio, YouTube videos, the internet, digital boards, newspapers, and recently we've also started to do some podcasts such as the Accessible Media Incorporated. We leverage our partnerships to make sure that all of our information is disseminated widely and can reach a range of people with disabilities across the city. We also do train-the-trainer style presentations to community organizations that provide services to people with disabilities so that they can then train their participants in a style that meets their needs. We do a whole bunch of outreach at events. We do try to focus on events that have an accessibility focus. So for example, the People in Motion exhibit, which is tailored to people with disabilities, and Mayfest, which is an exhibit that focuses on services for people that are deaf. The My Vote application we're quite excited about. So My Vote is an online tool that we launch on May 1st. When nominations open, and it enables people to put their address in the application and then find out where their voting place is, what kind of accessibility measures are available for them, the list of candidates in their ward that are running, as well as later in, I think, September, we post the ballot there so that people can take a look at the ballot and really get familiar with how to fill it out properly. So the My Vote is really kind of a one-stop shop for people to access everything they need to know about the electoral process. And it also helps that you don't have to rely on the voter information card. So for people that don't have sight, you get a voter information card in the mail and you feel it, and you probably throw it out as a flyer. So we recognize that, and we're really trying to provide some alternative formats. In terms of candidates, so we have resources available for candidates that are running in the election that have disabilities. We make sure all of our information sessions are in accessible spaces. We include an accommodation statement in all of our communications, so if they need any accommodation, we're happy to provide that. And then the other thing that we do that's really important for me is notwithstanding that the legislation doesn't require candidates to provide accessible campaigns, we really encourage them to do so. So for example, 2 Fridays ago, we had our first candidate information session with about 150 people that attended, and I spent probably the first 5 to 10 minutes talking to them about how important it is to ensure their campaigns are accessible so that people with disabilities have access to the information that they're providing to the electorate. So voting places. So each voting place we inspect multiple times. Sometimes we'll go early and inspect a voting place and it appears accessible, and then 6 months later we'll visit it again and buttons will be broken or construction will be underway that we're not aware of. So we do multiple inspections of our voting places. We're expecting for the 2018 election to have probably about 1,750 voting places. So it's a tremendous amount of work for us to identify and retain and inspect all of those locations across Toronto. And when we do an accessibility inspection, we look at like parking, the route of travel, slope, elevators, accessibility buttons, all of those considerations. And where we can, we identify where there may be some minor modifications we can make to make that space more accessible. So for example, putting in temporary ramps, better signage, or an accessibility or information officer to assist people to take elevators or open doors where needed. We also post our list of voting places usually early in the fall so that the public has the ability to take a look at where our voting places will be and provide us any feedback they have around concerns related to a voting place, including access issues. Accessible customer service. So we make accessibility a mandatory component of all of our training for our 18,000 voting place staff. And we really put an emphasis on accessibility. And again, we're going to make sure that we emphasize seeing eye dogs or support animals, that they are absolutely allowed in voting places. We also proactively recruit people with disabilities to actually assist us to do that training so that our electoral staff get to hear firsthand lived experience with people who are experiencing barriers to the democratic process. We have a dedicated accessibility email and phone line, and we also produce our voter assist terminal instructional videos and demo equipment at events so that people understand how to use that, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So for voting options, we over the years have tried to identify and implement a variety of supports to assist people with disabilities. So we have a voter assist terminal during the election in each ward of the city. And it essentially is a paper ballot marking technology that allows people with disabilities to vote independently and privately. And it includes an audio function, a touch screen where people can increase the font size or the contrast. It also includes Braille embossed keypads, a sip and puff tube, and a rocker paddle. The ballot transfer basically enables someone who does not have a VAT in the voting place they've been identified and they need a VAT. So we have a process to help them transfer that ballot to a voting location that has a VAT that they can then utilize to vote. People are also able to appoint a proxy voter. So for anybody, including people with disabilities that for whatever reason can't attend advance vote or voting day, they can actually fill out a form and appoint their vote to somebody else to do it on their behalf. We do curbside voting, so if someone is physically able to get to a voting poll but not physically able to enter into the building, we have a process where we can set up having a ballot officer come out to your vehicle and facilitate your vote on the curb. Personal assistance to voters, so again, you can bring a friend along. Election officials are available to provide any assistance to people with disabilities that's required. Voting places in long-term care homes, shelters, and retirement homes is another one of our priorities. So we try to identify voting places in those institutions and community centers and areas so that the voting staff there makes it easier for those residents to vote. The last one that I'm going to talk about is our new pilot program, which we're really excited about for 2018. For the first time, we're going to be doing a home visit pilot program. Next slide. I'm thinking of the sound. So basically, the home visit pilot program is a first for Toronto. They do it in Ontario and the federal government, and a couple of municipalities across Ontario have tried it, and we're going to try it for the first time in 2018. So it basically is an alternative voting method where election officials will come to your home in teams of 2, bring a ballot, and facilitate the vote inside someone's residence that are not able to attend a voting location due to injury, illness, or disability. So we're very excited about that, and our hope is that we can reach about 900 to 1,000 electors through that pilot project. And just a little bit of background on the home voting pilot program. So the Municipal Elections Act, which is our foundation legislation that helps to administer the election and by-elections in Toronto, does authorize the use of alternative voting methods that do not require electors to attend a voting place in order to vote. So last year, we brought a report forward to Council based on some input we received from the 2014 election and the 2014 accessibility plan that suggested that Toronto should really look at a home voting program. So we brought a report forward recommending that, and Council adopted that, passed a bylaw that gave us the legislative authority that we needed to then implement this alternative voting methodology. Our procedures for home voting are also on our website, so if anyone's interested in all the micro details of how we're actually going to facilitate that, they're all available for you to take a look at. And again, any feedback or comments, I'm happy to hear. So the program for home voting is going to run through advance vote, so our 9-day advance vote period. Last election in 14, we did 6 days of advance vote. This election, we're going to try to do 9 days. It's going to be we're all going to be very tired, but we had a really good turnout in advance vote last time, and we feel that that's a good process to help people get out and vote. And voters can register by phone or email between September 4th and October 5th. And as I said earlier, there'll be 2 home visit officers. They'll basically come in teams of 2, and we're also securely sealing those ballots in a double envelope system just to make sure that the privacy of that vote is paramount and it disconnects the identity of the person voting from the ballot that they've marked. And lastly, I just wanted to give you a little bit of update on internet voting. So the clerk totally recognizes the opportunity that internet or online voting provides for people with disabilities in order to improve access. And unfortunately, in 2014, 2015, 2016, we did a fairly fulsome internet voting project. And at that point in time, we were not able to identify a system, a technology system that was fully accessible, that at the same time guaranteed the security, ballot integrity, and secrecy of the election. Internet voting is still something that we continue to look at. We think that it's got some promise. There's some new technology, blockchain, that's coming out that banks and some other providers are utilizing. It's a bit of an emerging field, and we will continue to look at that with the hope that at some point in our future, it's secure enough that the integrity is built in and that we can use that potentially as an alternative voting method. We did bring forward a report to Council in late 2016 with the results of our internet voting project, recommending not to proceed because the clerk did not have the confidence in the integrity of it, and Council accepted that recommendation. So thank you so much for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Fiona, thank you very much for your presentation. I think there may probably be a question or two for you. So I'm going to start on my left side here, Rahima, and then Stephanie, and then we'll head over on this side to Yin and Michael. Okay, go ahead, Rahima.
Thank you for your presentation. Voting locations is in the lobby of an apartment, and there's some seniors who are bedridden. So will the home voting program be acceptable there?
It doesn't matter if there's a poll in their building. If they're housebound and not able to attend that voting place due to injury, illness, or disability, then and they register, then we would certainly facilitate a home visit to that individual so that they can mark their ballot.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Stephanie?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I can see a lot of progress has been made, so that's awesome. I have 2 quick questions. One, the voting options information. How is that information communicated to people like elderly who are in homes who don't use computers? Are there mail outs that go out with the information?
So I'm going to ask Carol to answer that question.
Yeah, We use multiple methods to communicate the information, and we do work with our network to also explore new ones. But we do a household mail-out that goes out to every household. It's an information piece that has all the information you need to know about the election. We have the voter information card that comes in the mail. And then we also do radio advertisements now. That's something new we've introduced in the last election. We do print ads, online ads, and we've got an out-of-home advertising campaign as well that includes the TTC. It includes information on billboards and sort of some of the mainstream things, some digital boards in apartments and residence buildings.
And my second question is about on the actual voting day, like if a voter is experiencing challenges, what's the path for them to be able to communicate the issue? Is it in real time to someone who that information goes to a manager and then up the channels?
So the dedicated sort of communication, customer service methods that Fiona mentioned are some of them, but we have a dedicated phone line, email address, as well as 311 we work very closely with, and we have a dedicated team in our election central area that all calls regarding accessibility or any barriers that someone faces during the election is when we want to hear from them. So those calls will be escalated directly to our dedicated team, and we'd want to resolve them on the spot right away. So that's what we plan for, so yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie. Yin, questions?
Just want to know how can we strengthen the Municipal Election Act so that candidates are required to have accessible communications?
That's a very good question. Well, I'll just tell you a little story. So 2 weeks ago when we had our candidate information session, the province was there, and one of the issues that came up is the MEA has gone through some really fundamental changes. 2 years ago, it was amended by the province. It was really the first fundamental sort of thorough review they had done of that act in 20 years. So we got a lot of changes, some good changes. But interestingly enough, one of the things that was raised at that meeting that I'll certainly be following up with them on is for a candidate that has a disability, if they need to purchase resources to assist them in their campaign as a candidate with disability, those things they purchase don't be counted towards their expense limit. But if a candidate wants to make their campaign more accessible, whatever they're doing to improve that, those expenses are counted. So that issue came up, and I think it's a very legitimate one. And I think after the 2018 election, we've already had a conversation with the province that we'd like a little bit of a debrief with them to sort of identify some of the areas that we struggled with to administer, or we heard from, electors and advocates were a gap. And that's certainly one that I feel personally very strongly about, that they need to make that improvement for sure. And, whatever kind of advocacy efforts to support that, I think are helpful. Sure.
I think also there was a request from elections when they debriefed with the province after the last election, and they did ask them to put some legislation in some points in the legislation around that, making candidates' campaigns accessible, but we didn't see that change in the.
Okay. Thank you very much. Michael, two questions.
Hi there. I was just going to echo Yin's comment or her question. I think one of the best ways to sort of go about doing it is to actually have a dedicated accessibility fund, though. And I think that's part of the problem, though, with that in that way. And then the other thing that I was also going to ask, too, is I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your accessibility plan and the barriers that you identified. Are they primarily physical barriers? Are they attitudinal barriers? And I think that's part of it. If you keep running into the same sort of physical barriers over and over again, of actually having that dedicated accessibility fund to help remove some of those barriers.
So the plan covers a lot of different disabilities, and we have tried to address various ones through the network and through some of the feedback we've been hearing and through the customer service, like the experience, the lived sort of experiences that individuals are having. We haven't put a barrier, like there isn't for us a funding sort of barrier that we've put that we're having a challenge with, but maybe with candidates, it is a little bit different because they do have expense limits and so on. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
I think so. I think it was part of it was sort of like when I think about like the accessibility plan in terms of identifying the barriers, for example. So like, is it like even like 50-50 split between physical barriers in terms of like voting stations, or is it more like attitudinal barriers? And I think it's just one of those things when you can sort of identify what those barriers are sort of very concretely. So if it's like 20% are, automatic door openers that are not working, then you can sort of, very clearly identify them. And then I think the other thing too is when I was talking about that dedicated accessibility fund, of having that fund. So, okay, say if 20% of the issues or the barriers are automatic door openers that are not working, or that there's no ramp, for example, having that fund to then sort of improve the accessibility. That was sort of what I was thinking.
So I don't know that we've ever sort of looked at percentages of barriers, and I think it's sometimes there's multiple barriers that are very interconnected. So I think sometimes it's very difficult to pull apart physical barriers from attitudinal. I mean, I think we're very aware from working with our network and people with disabilities, the range of barriers that they face, and I think that we've, over the years, really made tremendous effort to address those. In terms of an accessibility fund, for elections, we actually have a reserve fund that provides the funding for the clerk to administer the election. And, that fund allows us to make any kind of modifications to voting places that are required, unless it's full construction, obviously. But, in our warehouse, we already have ramps and signage and a whole host of accessibility modifications that we utilize in a voting place as we need to, as well as, if we notice that an accessibility button's not working, we would work with that property owner to ensure it gets fixed. If it's a city building, we would put more pressure on them. And, if it's on the day, then we would probably look at making sure we had an accessibility officer at that door so they could open the door for the person rather than having them push the button.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. To question, Councillor Layton.
Great, thank you very much. Just on the home visit program, and I may have just missed this in the presentation, but are you planning to do kind of bulk home visits at some of the supportive housing buildings, perhaps, in throughout the city, that might allow for a greater number of people to just have an accessible voting option within their building?
So I think we're doing a range of things. So in some of the supportive housing buildings, we actually have a poll in the lobby. So, for people that have the ability to leave their apartment and come down and vote in the lobby, we have lots of those across Toronto. And we prioritize those in long-term care homes, shelters, some of the larger supportive housing units. In terms of the home visiting program, we're not doing really any block. It's really an individual registration process where an individual elector would phone or email us and say, I can't get to a voting place. And then we would book that appointment, make sure they're on the list, and go and facilitate that.
Then a follow-up to that, because it sounds like you're doing kind of a halfway there for the supportive people in supportive housing. Is there a possibility that we can't also on voting day within those particular polling stations provide for some home visits just throughout the day even?
So I think we can certainly look at that, Councillor. I mean, the other thing that we do in long-term care homes and nursing homes is we actually do bed-to-bed voting. We're in hospitals.
Oh, okay.
So we do bed-to-bed. We usually work very closely with the manager of that long-term care home or nursing home. And we literally do a bed-to-bed vote for people that don't have that ability.
Okay, great. It sounds like that's already taken care of then. Just on the accessibility, making more accessible campaigns, having been one of many in this room or a handful in this room that have been a part of a couple campaigns in my lifetime. One of the big, and you've identified this, is the costs associated with it. Would there not be an opportunity for the city has the software, for instance, to make websites more accessible? Would it not be perhaps an option that rather than have a fund that just kind of gives money out to campaigns to become more accessible, allow for access to our existing tools to help provide some accessibility. I would argue that candidates are fools not to make it more accessible because they're trying to attract voters. Yeah. And if they're not getting their information to voters, then they're losing out. However, because of the expense, there may be some campaigns, some under-resourced campaigns, that need additional assistance. I grant that. I'm not sure, and I'll definitely go and look to see if my previous campaigns were entirely accessible. I know the buildings were, but I'm not entirely sure that the information was.
So I would say a couple of things. I mean, you know, an easy thing for me that I said at the candidate information session 2 weeks ago was, if you're participating in an all candidates debate and you get invited by the sponsor of an all candidates debate, then make sure that that location is accessible to people with disabilities. I mean, that's an easy one. In terms of the city providing some assistance, like website and tools, that gets a little bit tricky. The Municipal Election Act, when they amended it, made some very strong statements in the act that municipalities and the city proper is not allowed to do any level of support to any campaign directly, and that we're now required to have a use of corporate resource policy, which Toronto's had for a number of election cycles. And you'll remember that the updated one came forward to council for adoption, I think, in the January cycle. So, you know, I think our hands are tied a little bit there, but I think that we need to do better advocacy on that. I think that accessible campaigns are critically important.
Well, if we could just go a little bit deeper into that. There, for instance, city website does have the URL addresses for candidates. That in and of itself could be seen as a level of support.
Yes.
Having their names up there perhaps is different, but giving a direct link to the information about that candidate is a supportive, is the city doing something to draw attention to it. So I think that lines, and really we probably could push the line a little bit. Maybe a little bit.
I'm happy to look at that, Councillor.
The other opportunity would be to put it outside of the outside of the funding envelope that one's dedicated. I think you mentioned that, and that would certainly, for well-resourced campaigns, be fine. They would be able to spend money on the accessibility tool, but it wouldn't, for under-resourced campaigns, it would be more difficult.
Thank you very much, Councillor. To question, Wendy.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I learned a lot today. I wanted to ask about the day of as well. So I know Stephanie was talking about it earlier. And we heard that there's a phone line and there's an email address, but is there an actual designated person at each one of the sites that is in charge of accessibility?
Yes, there is. So each of our polls, the larger polls have a dedicated accessibility officer in all of them. The smaller polls that may only have 2 to 3 voting place staff, we do a combination of an accessibility officer, information officer. So they're doing a bit of a dual role, just because the volume of that poll is usually a lot smaller. But in any of our large polls, we have a dedicated accessibility officer. And again, the training they're provided, we're integrating people with disabilities into that training program so that they're really well armed to do the job they need to do on voting day.
So to clarify, all of the locations have somebody who has accessibility designation?
Yes.
In terms of solving, okay. I wanted to understand a little bit about the day of options too, in terms of the available options that you talked about. So you talked about curbside voting and the vote at home program. Are they available on the day, or is there always going to be advance notices required for those?
So in terms of the home voting program, this is our first election doing it, and we're considering it a pilot project. There's a lot of logistics to figure out how to serve 1,000 electors through 2 teams of 2 and facilitate the vote. So that pilot is only going to run through advance vote, not on election day. All of the other options that I outlined today, including curbside, are available.
Sorry, and that they need to be pre-registered, right?
Yeah, so for the home vote program, you have to register, and we're running it through advance vote. And then the other options are all available on election day.
Yeah, you have time.
One final question, and I realize it's a pilot that you're talking about. Can you say anything more about the criteria that will be used to determine whether the pilot becomes the way that things are done?
I think that we're committed to continuing the home visit program. I mean, I think it's an important accessibility option for people. I think the pilot really is sort of just testing volume, logistics, making sure that we've got a good process to facilitate it, ensuring the integrity of the ballot. We've put a lot of work into the home visit program in the last 6 months, so we're feeling pretty confident. We do have to report back to council and do a bit of a post-evaluation, but my hope is that it will become a permanent fixture in our elections. Other jurisdictions do it. I think it's a great option for people that need it.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And to question, Councillor Davis.
Similar to Mike's, though, is it possible even to provide guidelines, resources, information to campaigns?
So we actually do have a number of resource guides on our website for candidates to help assist them in looking at how to make their campaigns accessible. The province produces one, and we have a link on our website to that, as well as AMCTO produces one, and the link is there as well.
Right.
And they're very good, actually.
Okay. The second thing is, I know in the past, in our appointments process, we have attempted to do outreach to ensure that the pool of candidates are reflective of the groups we're attempting to address in terms of representation. What kind of outreach are you doing for recruiting workers from underrepresented groups? As a kind of employment equity strategy.
Yeah, so similar to the Accessibility Outreach Network, we also have 2 other outreach networks that we use, and they're all members of either they're active members from varying communities across Toronto. So there's the Election Outreach Network that includes multiple, like multicultural groups, very sort of targeted groups like organizations from, homeless shelters, homeless groups. There's representation from tenant groups, representatives from, so we work with all of them and we ask them to help us disseminate the information. So all the employment,
specifically about the disability community.
Oh, so with the AON, we actually provide them with all the positions that are available. We've worked very closely with a lot of the disability organizations, like Spinal Cord Injury has brought forward multiple, I would say more than multiple, probably a couple of hundred individuals that have worked on the election through their organization. They reach out, they post the jobs that are available for their members to be part of, to apply for the various jobs that meet their needs. We ask all the organizations that work with us, we've got about 60 that are active members, as well as we share and communicate with them all the job opportunities, when the jobs are being posted, how they can apply, and they are, we provide assistance for them to apply for those jobs in the voting place in various capacities.
Do we have goals? I mean, I know the overall goal is to make sure we have enough staff to ensure a successful election. But I'm wondering, I mean, it is an opportunity for employment that I know many people value, literally. So there could be some goals we establish for the percentage of jobs that have been provided to groups we know are underrepresented in the workforce, particularly the disability community.
So we don't have any performance metrics on that currently, Councillor, but I think that's a really interesting point that we need to take back and take a further look at.
I mean, it's been 12 years, 14 years, I've been waiting for the employment equity policy for the city, and we have yet to see it measured with established goals and targets. This is a one-shot opportunity where we could try to model how we do this so that we actually are purposefully attempting to achieve some employment targets.
I think that's an excellent point, and I'm certainly happy to look at that further.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from members? Darren, please go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I just have a couple of questions around the My Vote app. First off, I really like the idea of offering an app this election cycle. I'm just wondering, during the development process of the app, did you engage people with disabilities for user testing to ensure that the app is compatible with accessibility features on assistive devices or mobile devices?
So we have engaged with an accessibility consultant that actually has done extensive testing as we've been building the application and now that it's kind of at its testing state. So they have engaged persons with disabilities in part of that process. And as well, we are just waiting for this final draft version of the My Vote that we're going to be taking it to our AON members to also test it and make sure that it's been working and that it works and meets their needs as well. So along the way, through the consultant and through our AON members, we've been involving their feedback in the development of that application.
Great, thank you. My second question is, will the app provide information on the accessible voting terminals, including where they're located?
Yes, so when you, it will identify the voting location that has the voter assist terminal in it, at it.
Right.
And so you will know exactly also the accessible door, the entrance that you might want to use for that particular voting place, if it's different from the regular main entrance for any reason. And we'll also be able to use that app. So if there's a change of any sort of information regarding the entrance, so if we find out that the door opener is not working at a particular entrance, we're able to update that sort of information at that on the app.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I have probably just two quick questions. The City of Toronto currently has a fund that councillors can draw from to provide accommodations at public meetings and functions and events. That fund is, I think, capped at $44,000, meaning that every councillor gets $1,000, but not everybody uses it, and they can go beyond that as long as it doesn't exceed the $44,000 limit. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of that fund, Councillor. It's probably administered through Kelly McCarthy's area. Yes. That does the councillor support, so I'm sorry, I can't speak to that.
Then not a problem. I can confirm that that is correct.
You know more about it than I do.
Because we've drawn from it. But just given the mechanics of that fund that allows councillors, elected officials to be able to conduct more open and accessible meetings and functions, is it feasible to create a very similar fund, maybe borrowing from that template, so that there can be accommodations provided for the candidates, the campaign volunteers, and the general public that they interact with during the election period?
So as I said earlier, the MEA was amended and they put some very strong language in the MEA for the first time, requiring municipalities to adopt policies about the use of corporate resources to campaign and support candidates. So I think that that provision in the MEA would likely prohibit the city from potentially providing that level of service. But I think it's a legitimate question, and I'm happy to go back and have that conversation with the ministry and make sure that I'm not misinterpreting the intent of that provision and explore that idea further.
Okay, thank you. I'll be moving a motion asking for something very similar to that. So thank you very much for your answer. Seeing none, if there are no more questions of our speaker, then we can just head into the portion of the meeting where we speak to the item. Are there any members who are interested in speaking to this item? Okay, Monica, go ahead, please.
Yes, I just wanted to mention to Councillor, Davies, sorry. For instance, my organization, the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, we have the dates of when employment is going to open up, and we're all about employment of persons with disabilities. So that's going to be given to all of our clients so that they know what's available to them in terms of employment opportunities. So I'm a member of the AON as well, and so they do very carefully make sure that we're aware of all of that and that we disseminate amongst our own people, just so that you know that. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, that I remember being mentioned, because I had this question in one of their meetings, the people who live in buildings that have the pole in the lobby, I remember working one, and we went up to somebody's house who was somebody's apartment was too sick to come down, and that was considered a curbside vote. So they don't have to register for a home in that situation. It can be a curbside vote. So if they don't get the registration, then they can actually still be able to vote.
Thank you very much. Anyone else to speak? Wendy?
Just wanted to make a comment in general about the about what's available on the day of the election. And the reason why I was asking the questions around how much advanced time do people with disabilities have to spend planning to vote, people without disabilities don't have to do that, right? So if there's a way to consider prioritizing and making sure that these kinds of programs that we're talking about, including Vote at Home, are available on the day to people who have not done an advanced registration, I would think that that would be a way of moving towards ensuring that people with disabilities have access to the same kinds of democracy that everybody else does.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Anyone else to speak? Yes, Michael, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say one thing. I understand that the boundaries are also changing for the wards as well. So I know a lot of members of the general public don't necessarily know what the new boundaries are going to be. I can imagine certain people with disabilities are going to run into the same issue as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to place a motion, and I see that Carol, our clerk, is working really hard to get it on the screen. Perhaps what we can do is just give her a minute to do that. And I'm going to invite shelter staff to come to the front of the room, because I believe that you're next, and you'll be providing us with a presentation. So while you get that ready, we'll let the clerks. Sorry. Oh yes, there is a deputation. Okay, so we'll hear from the speaker first, and then we'll have staff present. Councillor Davis.
I was working on a motion too.
Oh, okay. Maybe what we'll do is stand the item down. And
okay. Yeah, I just thought of it. Sometimes.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Councillor Davis is also working on a motion, and that's all good. That's all very good. We'll stand this item down. What I'd like to do is invite Emily Dago to come up to the front of the room. We want to afford her at least a few minutes to speak. Emily, just so you know, you've registered here to speak on 4 items, and we're on item number 4, improving accessibility in shelters. When you're ready, I'll start your clock, and then we're going to hear from staff for the presentation. Thank you.
So I don't know how many of you know this, but in 2014 and 15, I actually took the shelter system to the Ombudsman of Toronto, and at that time it was Fiona Crean, and a wonderful lady, and her deputy, and because my husband and I had been homeless from February 8th, 2013 until February 2014 till June 2015. We got a place in June 14, but it wasn't properly accessible. What we went through at the Family Res Shelter, our lives were put in danger numerous times. We were given wrong directions by staff. We were sent out into the cold, bitter, -35 wind chill, bitter cold with lots of snow on February 8th by a shelter worker, having given us the wrong directions to the Lido Motel. If it wasn't for a TTC operator, I still remember the bus number, 7588, on the 86 Scarborough. If it wasn't for that bus driver, we would have been out in that bitter cold night. Everything that we had with us on my wheelchair, my old wheelchair, and on my husband's back and in our buggy cart, we would have probably ended up frozen to death because we didn't know where we were going. The light in front of the Lido Motel is not an audible light, and we didn't know where we were going. Not only that, is that bus driver made sure the office at Lido Motel wasn't even accessible. So we couldn't contact anyone. The laundry room, kitchen weren't accessible. We were in a bad spot, and we had to beg for a room at the family res, and we were told, oh, well, there's no heat in this room. No one bothered to try and fix the heat in that room. Instead, we were told, oh, you know, there's this room, there's no heat. So I was like, well, it's at the main res, it's all we've got, it's all we can do, you know. We couldn't use this kitchen at the shelter. We were constantly harassed by staff. The room, you know, it ended up that the heating register, once I'd learned how to use it, it's very simple, they put a lockbox on it so I couldn't turn on the heat in the room. 4 different times they gave us heaters, 2 of them broke. You know, we were put through hell by staff. We were constantly, you know, told off because we weren't using the kitchen in the res. It wasn't accessible. The doors were too narrow. The computer room, they had computers. Once I figured out how to change the settings in Microsoft to make it even basically accessible, they were locked down. There was no proper accessibility given for the computers or anything else. And when we did finally get into the accessible, and I put air quotes on that, room, there was almost a 2-inch gap between the floor and the step to get in and out. And at one night, there was a brick placed in the middle of the pathway to exit our room that was the same exact color as the pathway. Nearly destroyed my old chair. Where I had to park the chair was right by the door, where the door was warped, let in the rain, the snow, the cold. My old wheelchair got destroyed. We were constantly being harassed. We were having to come downtown 2.5 hours each way. We were treated like absolute garbage. Staff were not trained how to deal with people with visual impairments. The housing worker didn't know how to deal with people with wheelchairs. And because we were a couple with disabilities, with no children, we were shoved in the back end of Scarborough. Our supposed worker treated us like absolute crap. When we found out later that the Caledonia Fred Victor shelter had offered us a space, and our worker at the res had said, oh no, they're fine, they don't need it. Yet we would have been much safer, we would have been much closer to soup kitchens, we would have been much better off, and we would have had more accessibility. And I'm gonna tell you something. People are being shoved out to Scarborough with no supports, no accessible soup kitchens. The Welcome Home book does not go east of Brimley Road. And I'll tell you this much, I know when the Ombudsman's report came out, basically all they did at Family Res was slap a bunch of power buttons places and to rooms that weren't even accessible, washrooms that weren't accessible.
Emily, if I can get your final thought.
Yeah, thank you. When you go somewhere, even though only women's drop-in and downtown core is not even wheelchair accessible, it tells you pretty much what the staff think of people with disabilities. I know they're working hard on it, I get that, but it's 3 years later. What's actually been done? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Does anyone have questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you, Emily. Thank you for coming out today. I'm going to invite city staff to come to the front of the room, and they have a presentation for us. Again, the topic is improving accessibility in shelters. We're on item number 4, and we're still holding down item number 3. We're working on a couple motions, but I think we'll be able to come back to it at the end of this particular topic. Okay. Welcome back. You can also drop the desk if you like. You don't have to stand. I think Fiona was very gracious to stand, but she didn't have to.
We'll just get set up here 1 second.
Okay.
Thanks, Emily.
Anytime.
Much appreciated. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Raftis. I'm the General Manager of Shelter Support and Housing. We've put together a little presentation here on where we are with improving accessibility in shelters. And many of the things that our deputant had just explained are absolutely true in terms of the accessibility in shelters. We have a lot of work to do. And so we're on a path to do that work. So in terms of the presentation, we're going to talk about just briefly the shelter system and provide a bit of an overview, the current accessibility in shelters, work underway to improve that accessibility, and then next steps. For those of you who don't know, the city's shelter system comprises of 63 different shelters. 10 of them are operated by the city. 53 are operated by 30 different community partner agencies. The city's shelter system is quite diverse, and we take care of clients in a number of different sectors: family, youth, single men, single women, as well as mixed gender sector. Today, the system's capacity is approximately 6,500 beds, and this is a 50% increase from about 20 months ago. Toronto has more shelter beds than any other jurisdiction in Canada, and we're working hard to grow the system, bringing on a number of new shelters this year in 2018. So in terms of current accessibility, accessibility is poor in the shelter system, and we need to improve that. Obviously, disability does not discriminate, and neither does homelessness. So we recognize that there is a wide range of different accessibility needs, and one size does not fit all. We also recognize that few shelters are accessible. Some shelters have some accessible features, but the overall space and other building components create barriers for our clients. So as an example, you may have a wheelchair accessible main entrance, but no elevator in the facility. Also, you might have a barrier-free washroom, but the door is too narrow to allow proper access into the washroom. One of the fundamental challenges we face is the physical infrastructure. So we have many, many old buildings, and our oldest dates back to 1850, if you can imagine. That's actually Robertson House. Very few are purpose-built shelters. Most of the buildings have been modified from their original purpose, and this creates a unique set of accessibility challenges, including but not limited to drop-off, travel throughout the building and the property. So many floor level changes, door widths are very narrow, things such as that. And also, though, to be considered is the concept of shelter has also changed over time. So many of these facilities are not only used just exclusively for shelter, there are other support programs in the shelter itself that individuals who do not live in the shelter should be able to use. Excuse me. So we know we need to do better, as I had mentioned, and create a system that is truly accessible and meets the diverse needs of our clients. All new replacement shelters that are being designed with accessible features and spaces to ensure accessibility for staff, clients, and the public. New mandatory training, as our deputant had expressed, began in 2017, in the fall of 2017. And as you can imagine, with the 63 different shelters and literally thousands of people working within that system, it is taking some time to do that new training, but we're absolutely committed to that. Another major initiative being undertaken by the division is accessibility audits of all 63 facilities. So the audits have two main objectives: determine the accessibility compliance measures required for city-funded shelter facilities, so that's all 63 facilities, and also to estimate the funding required to implement, and implementation strategy to ensure that we have AODA compliance by 2025. We're also looking at the Out of the Cold programs as well, on top of the 63 shelter locations. So when we look at the accessibility audits that are currently going on, 43 of the sites have been assessed. in 4 different categories, and we have the results of Category 1. And Category 1 assesses 8 different measures to establish a minimum baseline for accessibility. So there's 3 basic questions there. Can a person enter the shelter? Can a person use the facility for its intended purpose? And can a person exit the facility? So when we look at the results of those Category 1 assessments, they're really quite poor. 0 of the 43 shelters meets all 8 measures. 2 of the shelters met 7, 3 of the shelters met 6, 4 of the shelters 5, 7 of the shelters met 4 of the measures, 3 of the shelters met 3, 4 of the shelters met 2, 8 of the shelters met 1, and 12 of the shelters didn't meet any of the requirements. So we'll just pull up some simple examples here. So this is a photograph of an entryway, a large concrete slab and 2 steps. And so when you look at this, the concrete pad appears to be in good condition, but clearly there is no accessibility ramp, and no one with mobility challenges can even use this doorway. There's no door operator, no tactile surfaces, no handrail, no contrasting designations between the risers to provide advance warning to visually impaired, just as an example. This picture is of a bathroom at one of the shelters. So there are a couple of features that people felt were maybe helpful, such as, a grab bar on the inside of the shelter, and that may help individuals maneuver a little bit. However, things such as the step leading into the shelter, you can't actually see that step, so it becomes a tripping hazard. The toilet obviously is, the height is incorrect. There's no lid for back support. And movement within this small facility is very limited also. Another example, again, of old infrastructure. This picture is of quite a large stairway, and it's showing an access path to an outdoor area that our clients would use. The outdoor space is obviously not accessible to some users who cannot maneuver the stairs. There's no door openers, contrasting edges, and no tactile surfaces. Similar situation to one of the other photos that we showed you. The other thing, though, that is quite concerning about this picture is actually we are putting additional challenges in there where staff have placed tables in front of the doorways, and there's a chair up there as well. So this has been fixed, obviously. But it highlights the fact that outside of these accessibility audits and training, there are very significant accessibility challenges within the shelter system. So moving forward, we have a lot of work to do. So once the final results from the 43 accessible audits are submitted to SSHA, we will analyze the following pieces for Category 2, 3, and 4. We'll assess the overall compliance measures for the shelter portfolio, and that will be to determine what is actually achievable. And we will be going forward to the 2019 and subsequent budget processes to ask for appropriate funding to be able to address these accessibility challenges. We will start with the city-operated shelters first, and then we will work with our community partners to identify how we can become AODA compliant within that time frame. And that is the fundamentals of the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the presentation, and Councillor Davis to ask questions.
I missed your last slide, but did it have it on it, get money through the budget process to do this?
Did it have that on it?
Yeah.
Yes, so absolutely.
Okay.
We will be requesting, or this will inform the 2019 budget process.
Okay. Because certainly that was the, I know that the budget in 2018 18 has identified some high order amounts to be able to meet our 2025 obligations. But I was hoping that it wasn't going to be drawn from other sources or other capital lines. So is it your understanding that you will be getting additional and new resources for accessibility?
So we'll certainly be asking for additional and new resources based on the independent assessment of the shelter system and the compliance audits. So we'll say, we will look at the compliance audits, identify how much it costs to make those fixes, and then we will ask for that money through the budget process.
Okay, because it says in the policy, which is another item on the agenda, that it's your job. You must ensure compliance. So presumably we will learn more about how you're going to do this in the budget process.
So the first step in ensuring that compliance is to have an expert come into the shelter system and say, this is what you need. That's what we're doing currently. Yep. We will absolutely be honest with those reports and say, this is what we need. As you know, I don't have the authority to put money in the budget, but we will certainly ask for that money in the budget to make those improvements.
Okay, because the results and how much work has to be done, it was pretty shocking, that one graphic that showed.
A lot of work.
You've got a lot of work to do.
And this,
and this is only one division. So it makes me very anxious. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Wendy to ask questions, and then followed by Yin.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you say a little bit more about what specifically the 8 elements were that you were looking at? Because the 3 questions they don't provide much detail. I'm specifically wondering about beyond just the physical accessibility piece of this, if there was anything else that was looked at in terms of communication.
So 2 pieces. So this really is technical audits related to the physical infrastructure. The training that staff are receiving currently are related to the other pieces. So in terms of the audits, so the 8 categories were pedestrian access from the sidewalk to the main entrance. That was number 1. Number 2 was 1 accessible entrance. Number 3 was access from the main entry level to at least one of all types of client facilities provided on that level. Number 4 was access to one type of sleeping area. Oh, and so I might add, so for number 1, 58% of the shelters met number 1. For number 2, 30% met that. For number 3, 35% met that. For number 4, access to one type of sleeping area, 21% met that. For number 5, access to one type of toilet and shower/bathroom, 21% met that. 1 accessible dining area, 35% met that. 1 accessible lounge, 28% met that, and 1 accessible exit in addition to the accessible entrance, 16% met that.
Thank you very much. Yin to question.
I did notice that most of the components you're looking at are physical, facilities related. As a blind person, and I just went to a shelter, meaning doing an audit, signage everywhere, very small. So communication in and out, like either to the public or internal to the residents. So I just wonder, any of your criteria relates specifically to communications and information access for those with sensory disabilities?
Through the chair, yes, the intention is to meet all of those individual pieces, both through these accessibility audits and as well through the training of city staff.
Thank you very much. 2 questions, Stephanie.
And Yin addressed part of it, but with the infrastructure, are you addressing visual smoke alarms for deaf and hard of hearing?
Through the chair, the answer is yes.
Okay, and sorry, one other, Ian mentioned signage. I also have a question about addressing accommodation for service dogs. I know it's a gray area, it's sort of not infrastructure yet, it does, kind of.
So through the chair, the answer is yes, and we're doing a lot of work right now related to pets in general, but service dogs in terms of a specific piece, the answer is yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Glenn, to question.
I want to also thank you for your report. My question concerns, given the current budget parameters, given where you are in the process, are we realistically on target to actually meet AODA compliance by 2025?
Through the chair, I think that would be better to answer that question after the 2019 budget process. So I think as we receive and pull together all of the results of these audits and we identify what the total cost is and have a project schedule for that, we will bring that forward. And you know, our position bringing that forward will be to be compliant by 2025. So we will do our very best to do that.
Thank you very much. Anyone else with questions? Yin, you've got a second set of questions. So before I come back to you, let's get Darren in here because he hasn't asked yet. Go ahead, Darren.
Thank you for your report. Just a quick question. What set of standards are you using to base your audits on? Is it the city's facility accessibility guidelines, the design of public spaces standards?
There's three pieces. There's the building code, there's the AODA standards, and the third piece was?
Toronto Accessibility Guidelines, 75% draft.
Okay, perfect.
Toronto Accessibility Guidelines.
Great, that covers it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Come back to you because you've already asked one time. I see some new hands go up. So Rahima next to ask questions, followed by Michael.
Thank you for your presentation. 5 sectors of service. How many shelters do you have for women and children only? And how many of them are accessible?
So I can get the specific, off the top of my head, I don't have those specific numbers, but there's a significant number for women and children. And we can see that, I would say that in terms of meeting the that term accessible, I don't believe any of them are really truly accessible. All of our new ones are going to be truly accessible, and all of this work will move to improve us to have many more places accessible. We do have accessibility features in many of our shelters, but because of the physical infrastructure and the challenges that I had laid out, I would say most of them are not, we would call truly accessible, but they have accessible features.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael, to question.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I was just going to ask, as a member of the public, and say they had an accessibility issue, is it being listed on the website? So if somebody wanted to know, well, is this shelter accessible or not, does it actually list it on like a City of Toronto website so people can look for it? And I'm also wondering about something as well. I mean, just from what we've heard so far, it sounds like there really are major accessibility issues. What are sort of the policies or procedures? So say if there is a person with a disability, they go to a shelter, they realize, okay, it's not accessible, it's not going to meet my needs, where are they referred to? Because I know you have city-owned shelters and then you have community partner sites. I mean, is there sort of staff training to say, okay, we can't meet your needs here, but you go to this community partner organization? The other thing, too, that I was going to ask is I know with Emily, the deputant, she had made reference to hotels. So I'm just wondering, is that part of, and again, that's sort of my ignorance on it, is that part and parcel? So if the shelter cannot meet the accessibility needs, do they refer, to a community partner, or then do they go to a hotel, or is a hotel just for like an overflow issue?
Through the chair, so lots of questions there. Yeah. So we do have a centralized process to very specifically work with individuals based on their specific needs. So In terms of the website is imperfect. And even if we had listed out that this facility had accessibility features, the occupancy data changes every day. So through central intake and through our Peter Street location, shelter staff work together to address very specific needs of very specific clients. And they would work to move clients to a location based on their specific need. If a motel was appropriate, then that is an option that we have used in the past. And if a specific shelter and an accessible bed is open, then we would use that.
Okay. I was just going to say, definitely that would be an area for improvement, just to, update the website so that information is there.
Agreed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yin, you have another question?
When you get your audits, when you do audits, do you give preference to people with lived experience of disabilities?
Through the chair, so the way that the audit was done was through a third-party organization, outside experts that met specific criteria, who came to the city to give us those independent audits. Again, very technical in nature in terms of the physical infrastructure of our facilities. In terms of feedback for the shelter system and consultation, we are doing broad consultation at the moment with all of the organizations that serve individuals experiencing homelessness. And in those organizations, there are many people with lived experience. Again, a broad range of issues there.
Okay. Thank you very much. And there are no more questions. No more questions. I see no more hands up. Then what I'd like to do is just move it inside for comments. And if there's no comments, oh, yes, Wendy, go ahead, please, followed by Yin.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I commend the audit, like actually going out there to see what the situation is in terms of accessibility. I'm actually shocked. I feel like we have abandoned people with disabilities in terms of access to the shelter system. So 21% of the shelters have a toilet that somebody with a disability can use. 21% have somewhere where a person with a disability could sleep. I'm actually astonished, and I just wanted to say that out loud. And I wanted to also just add, in terms of women with disabilities, and I don't know if this is common knowledge, but certainly within our community it is, that women with disabilities are far more likely than women without disabilities to be victimized, to be abused, to be assaulted. Some of the numbers I've just grabbed from the Disabled Women's Network of Canada website: 23% of women with disability experienced emotional, financial, physical, or sexual violence or abuse committed by a current or former partner in the past 5 years. That's almost a quarter of our population. And I mean, that's a higher number than the amount of shelter space that they could get into. Do you know what I mean? Speak in terms of percentages. So I just needed to say that out loud. I'm astonished. And I really commend that you're moving forward and trying to address this. And you're also looking at what the problem is. But as a woman with a disability, I can't imagine what I would do if I had to rely on the shelter system as it currently exists. So that's it. That's all I had to say, but I had to say it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for your remarks. Yin, please go ahead.
I just want to reiterate that communications and information access I feel doesn't cost a whole lot. If you're talking about signages and, make them big, make them high contrast, it's a printing thing, color choice. And I think, sending things in electronic format will do, and making sure website accessibility. So there are free, anyways, the apps and stuff. So I really do think that making communications and information accessible is a very doable, low-hanging fruit that we can, start with. And then I do want to stress that when you do hire third-party audits, I know you cannot force them, but I think preference or somehow stipulation should be given that that there should be some kind of significant input from people who have the lived experience, you know, and I can say that even in your, how can I put it, measurements, you know, how many of your consultants or auditors are representative of the population. Anyway, so because it's one thing to have that expert knowledge, but when you actually live the experience, you notice things that oftentimes someone going around with a piece of paper may not think of. So and of course these persons with disabilities, we are often invited to do audits, to give feedback, but we are not compensated for our time. And I think we can be part of this, talking about employment equity, we can be also paid for our expertise.
Yen, thank you very much. Anyone else to speak? Okay, Glenn, please go ahead.
As someone who has lived experience with, well, more invisible disability, also lived experience as being a homeless person in the past, I was aghast. I echo Wendy's sentiments to the nth degree. It has, however, had an interesting effect on me. I've gone from sad to angry to really determined. And if this doesn't galvanize us as a committee to be pushing like hell to move things forward, I don't know what else will.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Anyone else to speak? Councillor Davis, go ahead.
I too was just as shocked as you, and we have been waiting for years to really see the implementation plan for how our city buildings are going to be made accessible and to meet the timelines of 2025. So every department is presumably doing what the shelter division is, and if not, they should be. And I want to thank the shelter division for doing this work. What we need to ensure as councillors and as council, that the budget is there to make sure this happens. But we also need you as well. So I can see that the next round of budget requests are going to be interesting. The amount of money that was identified in general to deal with, there was sort of a high-level number that was identified. I hope that it's being refined by the audits that are going on so that the money is going to be put into the budget over and above all of the other capital improvements that have to be made on our buildings. So thank you very much. It was a good visual presentation as well, so that we understand the inadequacy of the facilities we're currently using. Not acceptable. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Anyone else? No? Then with us, we want to just say thank you for your presentation and also to the department for all your hard work this particular season. We know it's been a very difficult time. We also, I think, I'm going to speak for myself, I also recognize that the entire system is going through a massive overhaul. So not just the physical build, but the expansion and the enhancement of services and a more wraparound model. So I want to say thank you. That is not easy work, and I know you guys had a very difficult winter, and this committee is very grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you. So we're going to move back now to, oh yeah, so I need a motion to receive the presentation. I apologize. Darren, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. We're going to move back to DI 19.3. I have a motion. I believe Councillor Davis's motion is ready. Councillor Davis, would you like to go first?
Sure. With Carol's help, I think the wording is clear.
Can you please read that for
Yes,
those
I will. It was a bit, I struggled with a bit to get the wording. I hope it's okay. And it asks the executive committee to request the city clerk to use all reasonable efforts in the election recruitment to achieve the goal of hiring a number of persons with disability for election work that is reflective of representation in the general population. So that's how we do recruitment for our appointments, to try, and I know there's differences about what is the proportion of the general population, but the general intent is that we should have some targets and we should try to achieve them in the hiring for the election.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor. I will place my motion on the screen and I'll just read that. That City Council requests the City Clerk to review options for the creation of a dedicated fund to assist Toronto municipal candidates for the upcoming 2018 and future elections to provide accessibility accommodations for candidates, campaign volunteers, and the general public to promote greater civic participation and enhance democracy. I won't speak much more to it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I want to thank Michael for sort of sparking the conversation, because really your words inspired this motion, and to thank the election services staff for the extraordinary volume of work that you've done. Your presentation was very illuminating. Personally, I'm a little bit disappointed that we don't have internet voting, but I also recognize if the system is not secure, then let's not go there until we know there is something out there in the marketplace that we can buy. But I know that this election, with the expanded and different ward boundaries, with the 1,750 different polling sites, with the home voting systems, you've got your hands full, and we want to thank you in advance for all the work that you're going to put in there. Should we take the motions as a package? Is that reasonable? Yeah, okay. All those in favor of the motions before you? Okay, thank you. Any opposed? And the item as amended? Okay, any opposed? That carries. Okay, thank you very much. Now, just in the interest of time, it's 11:40. We have a deputant on item DI 19.5. Emily Dago, would you like to come to the front of the room? The item before us is accessibility, Bloor Street Bike Lane, Shaw Street to Avenue Road. We have 4 more items to go through in just under 50 minutes. This is a very awesome committee. We are going to do it. Okay, because I know many of you may have accommodations with Wheel-Trans waiting, so it's pretty much a hard stop at 12:30. If you have to leave the room during the time the meeting is still proceeding, as long as we have quorum, we're going to try to finish up the agenda. Okay, Emily, are you okay?
I'm going to be extremely quick on this one, because I'm one of those crazy wheelchair users that I love the bike lanes. The Bloor Street bike lanes, I'm a little concerned about the downtown ones. This is what I call these ones, is the downtown lanes. I'm worried about the traffic at Yonge and Bloor, especially with the condo developments and the amount of traffic there. Also, Avenue Road, I want to see it go all the way east, I admit. I will join Mike Layton in that fight absolutely any day. But right now I use the bike lanes that go between Ossington and where they end, this end. I use the bike lanes on River, I use bike lanes on Sherbourne and Wellesley, because the sidewalks are absolutely garbage. And I hate to tell you that, but they're garbage. For those of us in chairs that have neuropathy and back issues and cerebral palsy that tends to make us jump when we startle, and the sidewalks really look, this is what you're doing, you're like this, and it's really frustrating, and it breaks our wheelchairs, especially when curb cuts are only right in the middle and face the intersection. So bike lanes for me have been an absolute godsend now that I live downtown. And I want to see these bike lanes come to fruition, but what I want most, I don't want just markings on the road. As a person with disability who actively uses bike lanes, at least the bollards like that are on River Street. But the most wanted ones, I would love to have separated bike lanes by a physical separation, because cars, delivery trucks all sit in the bike lanes. I understand the Wheel-Trans issues. That's a huge issue for the bike lanes. But one of the biggest things is for those of us with wheelchairs, especially with all the condo construction and how narrow they make the sidewalks, and they're hoarding stuff. Bike lanes are actually safer for those of us in chairs. And being both legally blind and technically deafblind in my right side, it makes it interesting, dodging people in those narrow spots. And thinking of Church and Carlton is a bad one. But these bike lanes are definitely needed, and I would like to stand with you guys and get them done. And please make them as accessible as possible. Possibly a high contrast color to the rest of the road would be great. I've seen green, I've seen yellow, I've seen blue around Canada and the world. Thank you.
Emily, thank you for your remarks.
Vroom,
Any
vroom.
questions for Emily? Okay. Thank you, Emily. We have a presentation prepared from staff. If I can invite staff to the front of the room and then set up, and we'll look forward to hearing your presentation. And while staff are preparing that, if I can just draw your attention to some correspondence that came in from Walk Toronto, just so that in the interest of time, if you haven't had a chance to read it, you would have seen it electronically, but there's also a copy on your desk. I will be moving a motion just in advance to let you know that I'm going to be sending their correspondence and technical report to the executive committee to see if staff can incorporate these very smart remarks in their final designs. So I'm just trying to shorten the meeting. Okay, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for inviting us to share information with you regarding the Bloor Street bike lanes. We're showing now a picture of Bloor Street, how it looks today, with the approved bike lanes in place. My name is Sean Dillon. I'm the Acting Manager, Cycling Infrastructure and Programs here with the City of Toronto. And beside me, David Dunn, Project Manager for the Bloor Street bike lanes. So for some background, in May 2016, City Council approved the implementation of a pilot project to evaluate bike lanes on Bloor Street between Shaw and Avenue Road. City staff, in conjunction with the BIA's, Toronto Centre for Active Transportation, University of Toronto, and many other stakeholders, conducted extensive before and after data collection to evaluate the effect on the cycling environment, the motoring environment, curbside demands, local business, and public perceptions. In November 2017, City Council approved the permanent bike lanes on Bloor. A planned resurfacing in 2019 provides an opportunity to provide a greater degree of separation for the cycle track. The pilot design features, as shown, separated bike lanes located continuously next to the curb. Vehicle lanes reduced to one lane in each direction, on-street parking only on one side of the street, but now available 24 hours a day, and separation created with painted buffers, bollards, and parking. The separation that prevents vehicles entering the bike lane also limits access to the curb for persons with accessible needs. We consulted with stakeholders to help identify locations, like the one shown here at Trinity St. Paul's Church, where there was a high need for access to the curb. Accessible needs were also addressed after installation with the provision of a curb cut ramp at lay-by at 341 Bloor Street near Huron. Sorry, out of order there. Parking is now provided on one side only, but is available, as I said, at all times, with no peak period restrictions that existed previously. The implementation resulted in the loss of 136 on-street parking spaces, or approximately 45% of what was there previously. Road resurfacing for Bloor Street from Bathurst to Avenue is currently planned for 2019. Conceptual design for the cycle track is complete, and now ECS will begin detailed design. Site-specific and local issues will be addressed during detailed design phase, which will progress from now until the end of 2018. Physical changes to the roadway design with the resurfacing is very limited, primarily due to the drainage, as the sidewalk is not being changed. Different designs will be required for the different sections. I will now turn things over to David Dunn, the project manager for the Bloor Street bike lanes. As David reviews the different options that will be possible in different sections of the project, we would appreciate your help identifying any accessibility issues these options may create. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm going to go through, there's 3 different options that I'm going to review. The first option is keeping in mind that the dimensions relative to what's in place right now will stay about the same. And we've taken the cross sections that you see illustrated for the bike lane that are going to be illustrated for all the options. There are varying widths in the across Bloor Street through the pilot area, or now the area where we're going to be implementing the permanent design. So don't focus too much on the actual dimensions. The concept and how the cycle track will be implemented will be approximately the same in all the sections. The dimensions may change a bit. So on the first section, or the first design option I'm going to describe is a raised cycle track with a step design. And what I mean by step design is that it's raised and separated with a vertical separation curb that's a 4-inch curb between the vehicle lane or parking lane and the cycle track, and then another intermediate curb that's only 2 inches, so the second step, stepping up again into the boulevard or sidewalk area, and that's a 2-inch curb. Now, we've been advised that that 2-inch or 50-millimeter curb would be cane detectable. So typically when we've done some cycle track designs at sidewalk level in the city before, we've done a tactile paver strip in between that's cane detectable. But in this case, with the 50-mil curb, it would not be required because that would be cane detectable. So with the step design, part of the necessity for the step is that, as you can see, the area between the sidewalk and the cycle track, that's where the existing drainage and catch basin is. So we have to bring the water. The slope of the road and the slope of the sidewalk go different directions, and that's how the water drains into that catch basin area. So we have to create the slope for the cycle track to go into that area, and it has to catch the water. And so that 50-mil curb will catch the water and then bring it to the drainage services. So the next slide shows a little bit more detail on the step. The step can be either a barrier, a full face curb, or a step design, a semi-mountable design. So the illustration there shows the semi-mountable design, which would be a 3-to-1 slope. So if it's going up 50 millimeters, then it goes up that 50 millimeters over the distance of 150 millimeters. The intent of the semi-mountable, that hopefully it would help facilitate wheelchair access across the cycle track. So somebody loading, unloading from the parking areas could do it at level with the parking onto the cycle track, but then to have that barrier between the cycle track and the sidewalk, to have a semi-mountable curb, we think would facilitate that movement. Although there's also the desire to do a barrier curb as a possibility, because with a semi-mountable or a flush curb, there's the issue of cyclists traveling into the pedestrian area, and a full-face curb or 90-degree curb would help deter that movement. If we do go with that design, there's the opportunities to make localized curb depressions to facilitate crossing over those areas. The second design option is, as I said again, it's difficult. It would be the fully level, and there's some areas where we would want to have fully level access across the sidewalk and the cycle track, for example, at bus stops. And in this case, it would be a 150 millimeter curb at between the vehicle lane and the cycle track, and then the drainage again would come into the existing location, but now it wouldn't be caught by the curb, it would be caught by a trench drain. The issues with the trench drains are we have done them in the past, as you'll see in the next slide, at bus stops, but over a long distance, debris, everything gets trapped in them, and they're very hard to maintain. And if they get clogged, it would be difficult to maintain them. So we would only do them, we don't want to do it over long distance, but over short distances, we have managed it. And I think the next slide will show an example of where we did it on Sherburne, which is also a cycle track design that was done as part of a resurfacing. And as you can see on the bus stop location is demarcated with the yellow tactile, and just in between the yellow tactile and the sidewalk, that's where the trench drain is visible, with the two locations at both the start and the end is where it would then go into the, have a little pup that would go to the regular drainage system. Now the last design, Sean will hopefully pull up, is in areas, as I said, that with the resurfacing, it's difficult to incorporate a design. It's not a full rebuild or just resurfacing, so the slopes of the roadway and the sidewalk are generally maintained, and we have to incorporate our design into that. And sometimes those grades don't work out. There's limits on how much slope we can put to both of them, or if how far out we can build the extension. In some situations, we can't do a raised design, and in that case, we would keep essentially the same design that we have out now with bollards and paint, and then we could supplement those to enhance the separation with either the curbstones with bollards on top, or as we've done on Wellesley, we could do, this is called a poured-in-place curb. Our preference right now would probably be to do a precast, so we could, they would be placed and pinned into the roadway, but they would give the opportunity to, a better opportunity to either move them in certain situations, create breaks in them, and we can't always anticipate where those breaks might be in the pre-design or the design until it's actually physically built. So that gives it would give us more flexibility. But again, those two options are available, either a poured in place or a precast. Now we'd like to open it for any questions on any designs.
Okay. Thank you both for your presentation. Questions, Councillor Layton, followed by Yin.
Yes, thank you very much. We've had lots of discussions about the raised curb option number 3, as the bike lane was being conceived of, and one of the issues that arose was emergency vehicles and how they got across Bloor. Have we evaluated that in this scenario?
So again, the barriers, and in either case, either raising it or putting the barrier curbs again, would have the passable space issue. So yes, they would be placed with enough room so that they would still have the emergency vehicles to be able to pass.
So if there were raised barriers, there'd be spaces in between them?
There's enough space in between where the barriers are for the cars to pull over and the emergency vehicles to pass.
Are we sure about that?
The one section where it's constrained is between Bathurst and Spadina, in which case we don't have a separation on the north side, and even with the resurfacing, we still would not have a separation.
So even with the resurfacing, we wouldn't do anything to the north side of the lane?
There's not enough room, no.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yin to question.
Sorry, I can't see, so I'm trying to understand from your description, but could you tell me which one would protect the pedestrian the most from wayward cyclists?
In terms of protecting from wayward cyclists, certainly the stepped design, where we've got both a curb at the street edge and another smaller curb at the sidewalk edge, would provide the greatest separation from cyclists for pedestrians.
Okay, thank you, Yin. And Rahima to question, followed by Councillor Davis.
Thank you for your presentation. Wheels Trans is supposed to be door-to-door service. These flexi-pole bollards are getting in the way. So what can be done to resolve this problem?
I guess that's part of why we're here, is to get some advice from the community. We're looking for better alternatives. We're hoping that some of the design options that you've seen today are better alternatives. And certainly what we are recommending wherever it can fit is the option 1, but recognizing that this is a resurfacing, so our options to move the sidewalks are extremely limited. So, we would be implementing option 1 as our recommendation wherever possible, moving to option 2 where it's not technically feasible, and then only going to option 3 where there's no other option.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahima. And Councillor Layton with a second question.
Yes, thank you very much. And this will be very quick because one of the pieces of correspondence we received, and I'm just going to, from Walk Toronto, also came up with an idea, and I know that this has come up a couple of times, about accessible parking on street on Bloor. And in the illustration that they have, they show an accessible spot rather close to an intersection. And I'm just curious, and perhaps you can go back and in your review of the accessibility measures beyond what we're talking about today or in the presentation, about what other jurisdictions are looking at with respect to distance of parking from intersections. Because I know that's, when we redid the lane, it actually took up quite a bit of space. The new distance requirements, which we're about safety, I get it. But the illustration in particular has the parking just within meters of an intersection. An unsignalized intersection, it looks like, but an intersection nonetheless. And so perhaps we can do an evaluation of what some other jurisdictions are doing. And there's a good rationale for it, that by having the spot there, the person exiting the accessible spot has easy access to up onto the sidewalk.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor. And certainly we'd be happy to look at those recommendations, all of the recommendations from Walk Toronto, and consider those during our detailed design, and those that can be implemented, which we think would benefit the community, we would certainly support.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Stephanie to question.
I'm just relaying this question for Joe, because his mic's not working, but what kind of feedback have you gotten or are getting so far about what options people prefer or what challenges there are?
We're not at a stage right now where we've had consultation on these specific design options. We will have some stakeholder meetings where we will get options, but I think you are the first that have really seen these options.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you to staff for the answer. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, those who are interested in speaking to the matter. No? Okay, Joe, go ahead, please.
This mic is working. Okay. Well, just as a comment, it would seem to me that the option with the paint on the bollards that stick up 2-3 feet, whatever they are, that is probably your most flexible option in terms of being able to adjust it in the future, because poured concrete and such, once it's there, it'd be a lot of effort and money to change it. And plus, it probably gives the best protection to pedestrians is in that the existing 90-degree vertical curb is still there. And the other comment is the parking gets moved away from the curb and it's more out into the lane, and you've got the bike lane now between the parked cars and the curb, correct? So my vehicle has a ramp on the side, so if I were to park there, my ramp would be right into the bus lane, or sorry, the bike lane, and it would be exposed to any bikers and whatever that's going by at the time. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Joe. Anyone else to speak? No? Okay, so I just want to I'd like to move a motion in that, and I almost introduced it earlier, but it's really to take the correspondence from Walk Toronto and to refer this to staff. If you can put it on the screen, then I'll read it out loud. That the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee recommend that the Executive Committee refer the comments and recommendations in the letter from Walk Toronto on the proposed design options for the Bloor Street bike lanes to the General Manager, Transportation Services for consideration during the detailed design of the permanent Bloor Street bike lanes. I believe Walk Toronto has put together some really good critique and some design options for the options that were placed before us today. It's rather difficult for this committee to comment on such technical work in such a short period of time, so I don't want to rush the conversation. I do want to thank you for coming out to present to us. I do think that the Walk Toronto, which is a group that we are all very supportive, and they represent a coalition of individuals who are very concerned about improving pedestrian and cycling safety, supportive of active transportation, big supporter of Vision Zero. I think that they've captured a lot of the technical comments that we could probably, as a group, support. And that is about prioritizing road design for vulnerable users, to build in safe systems to make sure that we can take away all possible infrastructure designs that create accidents. We don't cause more. But this committee has in the past been pitted against cycling advocates. So one vulnerable group pitted against another vulnerable group with respect to road safety. Not a good place for us to be in. And I think that these recommendations from Walk Toronto is something that we can all pretty much get behind. Because they bring a balance to the conversation that I believe can be supported. So that's the motion. And with respect to the next steps, please, keep us informed. We would like to know what happens afterwards. Considering that 2019 is the timeline for the resurfacing, which means that you're going to be dropping some very expensive infrastructure into the road, we want to make sure that it meets the needs of all road users before that's done. Okay, so thank you very much. There's a motion on the screen before you. All those in favor? Okay, any opposed? That carries. And we probably need to, item as amended then. Do we know? We don't need that. Okay, thank you very much, staff, for all your hard work. DI 19.6, accessibility at construction sites. We get a lot of concerns about that. Emily Daigle, you want to come to the front of the room and we'll have you set up for your remarks.
So I'm going to be as quick as I can because I know we're strapped for time. 3 big things with the accessibility around construction sites. Number 1, and Kristen Wong-Tam, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say this, Church and Carlton. Need we mention trying to get on the buses that are replacing the streetcars? When you're in a power chair, it's not fun. You're blocking the sidewalk when you're trying to get on the bus. There's a lot of poles. There's a very narrow walkway. The hoarding has made that walkway even more narrow. The sidewalk's not in the best of condition. Visually impaired people, oh man, my husband's legally blind, and my totally blind friends, we were walking over there one time, a couple of weeks ago, and my friend goes face first into one of the poles that are holding up the hoarding. His cane didn't catch it because the pole comes down and the inner piece has a piece that angles in, it rounds in like on a curve, comes down, and it's only from 3/4 from the top to 3/4 from the bottom of the pole. And he just slammed his face right into it because the cane didn't catch it. And his poor guide dog, I mean, the next week he's like, forget it, I'm bringing a guide dog. Well, yeah, that time the poor guide dog got smushed. So by people just walking way too fast, not watching where they're going, cell phones in their faces. The construction at Eglinton is a nightmare. If you're in a wheelchair and you're a wheelchair user, don't use Eglinton Station. Don't use any of the businesses around there because it's impossible. They've got one narrow piece of sidewalk open right now that's full of hoarding. That is an absolute nightmare if you're in a wheelchair of visual impairment, much less being totally blind with a guide dog. The The construction is getting out of control. I'm downtown now, thank you, Lord. And there's the old library administrative building has been torn down, but the construction company who's running it don't shovel the sidewalk. Yet in that community, there's around 60 people in wheelchairs and people with disabilities that need to use that sidewalk to get to the only grocery store in the area and Dollarama and library and all of that, and we have to walk there. Well, you can't go through the sidewalk. So you're going through a very narrow lane of Front Street where cars are zooming by because they use it as a bypass from the Gardner and the DVP. You could get mowed down at any time. Another big problem with construction sites that I'm seeing is there's condos going up in my area, tons of them. Trucks are sitting on curb cuts. Trucks are in the way. They're not, Wheel-Trans can't get through. And it's an absolute cluster, especially the bottom of Bayview. And I wish Councillor Chirosi was here. The other thing I'm having problems with is the downtown core, and this is Krista Wong-Tam's area. There's construction sites in your area for condos like Yonge and Bloor. To get in the accessible entrance, the Hayden Street entrance of Yonge and Bloor Station, I have to drive on the road because there's no sidewalk available on that side of the street. So you come across Hayden, you gotta cross Hayden, risk your life because there's trucks just coming in and out. And it's stuff like that, and the hoarding coming up Yonge Street is too narrow. These companies, the poles for the hoarding are gray. They should be a high contrast color. There's a little bit north of College, there's construction just before the McDonald's. It's poorly signed. People with wheelchairs are falling off the curb cut. Where there is no curb cut, they can't see where the actual curb cuts are. I mean, how expensive is it to paint the patch of concrete you've put in to make a curb cut? How expensive is it to paint that yellow? I'm getting really, really fed up with these condo developers and these different construction projects that have absolutely no thought to people with disabilities. And it's getting absolutely stupid, especially if you live downtown with all the condo construction, much less the road crews and construction trucks in Scarborough sitting in the middle of curb cuts. For the streetcars, they're not being cleared out. There's construction trucks also sitting there. So I want to thank you for having this. One of my big pet peeves right now is along King Street.
Emily, I need your final thought.
Sorry, Kristen. It's a big pet peeve of mine, but thank you, and let's just deal with this because it's getting stupid.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. Any questions of the speaker? Okay, seeing none, then we're going to invite city staff to come to the front of the room, and we look forward to receiving your presentation. While staff are preparing the presentation, can I just get a show of hands to see who has to leave by 12:30 sharp? Okay, so there's a few of you that can stay a little bit. Okay. I think we can finish the agenda. This side, well, we can skip ahead to maybe address new business. So the new business that was added, DI 1910, essentially it was a letter from the from Terry Ann Langdon from the Working Group of Transportation. So it's been added, and Yin, would you like to move that? Would you? Yeah, okay, so do I need to read this out loud? No? Okay, so all those in favor of the recommendations in the letter? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. We are being very efficient. And so we've already dealt with point 9. Are you ready, Eric? Okay. Oh, okay. Can you work for the screen on the big screen? Even? Okay. Go ahead then. Please start.
Good morning. I guess, good afternoon now. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Eric Jensen. The new manager of traffic operations, setting up a unit to deal with construction coordination citywide and traffic mitigation. I will apologize to the members. The report you have in front of you, or the presentation you have in front of you, differs from the one that's on the screen only as far as the template. Being a new transplant back to transportation, I didn't get the transportation services presentation template until after I'd already submitted.
Don't worry, we're interested in the content.
I know. That is point of clarity.
Okay, thank you.
So that you're looking at the screen going, this is not what I have in front of me. I left this screen in, though, or this slide in, that speaks to a new mission, new vision, and new principles for transportation services as we go forward, because it speaks to connecting people to their places and to their city, and to access and to continue to allow people to move safely. And that's what we're looking to do here. So how do we ensure the integration of accessibility requirements into work zone design? This is done through a combination of AODA, HTA, OTM Book 15, and Book 7. This will be, this slide's in your handout. So for AODA, and you're all more familiar with it than I, it's provincial legislation intended to facilitate the development, implementation, and enforcement of accessibility standards for Ontarians with disabilities with respect to the items that appear on the list: goods, services, facilities, accommodation, employment, buildings, structures, and premises. The HTA, the Highway Traffic Act, is also provincial legislation that regulates the licensing of vehicles, classification of traffic offenses, administration of loads, classification of vehicles, and all other transportation-related issues on all public highways in the province of Ontario. Under the Highway Traffic Act, the Ministry of Transportation publishes the Ontario Traffic Manual, or OTM. The manual is comprised of 22 books and is intended to provide information and guidance for transportation practitioners like the members of Transportation Services with the City of Toronto, to provide uniformity of treatment in the design, application, and operation of traffic control devices and systems across Ontario, which is consistent with the intent of the HTA. Of these 22 books, Book 15, Pedestrian Control and Protection, and Book 7, Temporary Conditions, relate more specifically to the issue of accessibility at construction sites. And when we refer to construction sites, we're only referring to sites that are located within the public highway or within City of Toronto roads. We've heard a number of folks this morning talk about issues, and I'm noting those as we go. So Ontario Traffic Manual Book 15 sets out guidelines consistent with the Highway Traffic Act with respect to pedestrian crossing applications, and again provides a basis for road authorities to generate and update them with their own guidelines and standards. It is through these guidelines that the Ministry of Transportation incorporates the provisions of the AODA into the technical design and functional operation of pedestrian crossings and pedestrian facilities with a view to providing barrier-free access. Book 15, however, defers to Book 7, Temporary Conditions, as the manual that provides guidance for the control during construction, maintenance, utility work on roadways in Ontario. Where did I go? Sorry, I went too far ahead. OTM Book 7, Temporary Conditions, again providing guidelines consistent with the Highway Traffic Act with respect to traffic control during construction, maintenance, and utility work on roads in Ontario. It's through this volume that the manual specifically addresses the issue of accessibility at construction sites. Book 7 lays out fundamental principles for work zone design, which include but are not limited to worker safety, road user safety, which includes motorists, pedestrians, cyclists, and others, as well as road user mobility. Section 262 of Book 7 specifically deals with pedestrian safety considerations. When staff go out and meet with constructors, whether it's part of capital work, whether it's part of private development, whether we're reviewing submitted construction traffic management plans, there are pedestrian safety considerations that we look to address in all temporary control layouts to determine the extent of pedestrian accommodation required, observe existing pedestrian travel patterns, and/or meet with the local community to assess the impact on those. The section requires that where pedestrian facilities are to be maintained, they also must be done so in accordance with the provisions of AODA and made safe for all users. And I know that we have to do better with this. City of Toronto requirements basically stipulated in every permit issued by the City of Toronto for use of a public highway, so use of a street, sidewalk, boulevard, whether for construction, events, or film, all are issued subject to compliance with the provisions of HTA and OTM Book 7. All occupiers of the public highway under the provisions of these permits are required to ensure their temporary condition setups provide safe, barrier-free access for all users in connection with activities. And where pedestrian facilities are not able to be safely maintained through or directly adjacent these activities, clear, safe, and controlled access to pedestrian facilities is to be provided, whether at an existing controlled crossing point or by means of a paid-duty police officer to stop traffic to assist pedestrians. I've heard a number of comments this morning, and there are good actors and bad actors out there in the environment with respect to construction setup. We have a number of staff across the city who meet with constructors, all of whom have safety front of mind when we do this. But I don't think they all get the issues that the community faces to the degree that they're going to need to make a better environment out there for everybody who's going to use our sidewalks and our streets. And that's something we're looking to work with you on to improve as we move forward. The new unit is being set up. It won't actually take hold until the Transportation Services Divisional Reorg is completed this year. But in the interim, these concerns are definitely things that we can speak to within Transportation Services through the, where am I? The SMC, sorry, the Safety Mobility Committee that I sit on, that's actually meeting presently, and also the work zone subgroup to ensure that we elevate the level of understanding of the issues that exist out there at construction sites. I read the letter that came in from the Walk Toronto folks and the recommendations that they've made within those. And, off the top, looking at them, all of them seem, to fall within the existing regulations and legislation that we currently have. It's simply a matter of doing better and making sure that the provisions of those pieces of legislation and bylaw are addressed going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for your presentation. Do we have questions for Eric? Okay, so I see a whack of hands go up. Just slow down. I'm going to acknowledge Wendy, Yin, and then Monica. And on this side of the room, I see Rohima's hand, Martin, and Stephanie. What I'd like to do is, before we begin the round of questions, if I can just ask if I can get a mover to extend this meeting, because we're not going to break for lunch, we're going to work right through it. And Monica is motioning to extend to finish the agenda, correct? Okay, everyone is in agreement? All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. So Wendy, please proceed.
Hi there, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask a general question because I really truly don't know. In the event that there's a person with a disability who experiences the kind of situation that we heard about with Emily this morning, so somebody comes across a construction site, somebody with a disability, and literally can't get down the sidewalk, what are they supposed to do? Is there a procedure for who they contact? Is there supposed to be information on the construction site that somebody calls, or is there a requirement for that information to be made public?
Through you, Chair. There's a site superintendent at all of the construction sites if it's private construction, like developer related. At City of Toronto construction sites that would deal with sidewalk or road reconstruction, TTC track reconstruction, sewer water main reconstruction, there are site representatives that are there. And they're there to address those issues. At the pre-construction meeting that staff would have had, there would have been the expression of the requirements as well as the documentation to ensure that those types of obstructions don't exist, and that they need to be addressed, not in a week, day of, at that time, to ensure that that mobility is maintained.
Do you have the time? Go ahead.
So who is it, like, how are they supposed to make that complaint at the time? So it sounds a bit like you're saying they're supposed to flag down a site rep on the day, and how are they supposed to know who a site rep is? Is there any public information about what a complaints process is?
There wouldn't be at those types of sites, no. I mean, short of that, again, it's a more of a delayed process, but going through 311, it gets routed to us directly that way as well. But at an individual construction site, I don't believe that there is any information posted with respect to that. But, I mean, it's, first person you see wearing a hard hat and a vest. Seriously, I mean, you can snicker at that if you want, but when we go to site, unless we're going straight to the site trailer, it's, where's the super? I need to speak to the site super.
You can appreciate that could be very difficult for many
Understood.
people, right? Particularly if you can't see the person with the hard hat and the vest. So perhaps some kind of a public information system would be helpful.
Did you want to respond to that? No? Okay. Next speaker, next person to question is Yin.
I was going to ask something similar. So yours, is it then the only recourse we have when we encounter difficulties is 311? And then you talked about the committee that might be responsible for this is being formed, or so. Can you give us something more specific, like the dates, when this committee or is it gonna actually be formed, or are you the person to contact if we have something more serious, or is 311 our only recourse?
Through you, Chair, I will be. The unit that we're setting up to deal with construction coordination on a citywide basis is meant to elevate and standardize the way construction presents itself on the street. And I would hope that we would be setting up some sort of a communication protocol within that. We haven't begun that work yet. I don't like the idea of having to go through 311 any more than anybody else does, truthfully, with the delay that you get. I mean, if someone's out there and they're having an accessibility issue, it's there, then, in the moment, and that needs to be addressed then with a site rep. I mean, there are 10 of our staff that would deal with all construction citywide. They won't be at all of those sites all the time. They may be there randomly, but there should be site supers or representatives there and field checks being made to ensure that permit conditions are being addressed and adhered to.
Thank you very much. To question, Monica.
Hi. So I understand all of our questions on this side are fairly similar. You have yet to say when this committee is going to be formed. So what's the date that this committee is going to be formed?
It's actually not, so the Safety and Mobility Committee already exists within Transportation Services. The new unit that will deal with construction coordination and traffic mitigation is in the process of being set up through the Transportation Services divisional reorganization and is right now scheduled to be completed mid to late November of this year.
Okay. Okay, I think everything else is a comment.
Thank you very much, Monica. Rahima, questions?
Through you, Chair. I don't know that people would have the information at hand then either. Until such time as that unit is set up, all those issues get routed through Transportation Services district offices, through the manager of traffic operations to their staff. If the intent is to route. Well, that's.
Well, let's keep going, because I think there's going to be some speeches for you. Rahima.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. This is regarding OTM Book 7, safety around condo sites.
Or all construction sites.
No, all construction sites, yeah. There's a condo going up right beside where I live. And there used to be a chain-link fence. And people using different assisted devices, shopping carts and strollers, I have witnessed them almost going into the construction site, into the pit, into the hole. There was a person using a white cane, and I don't know what the technical word is. I call it the feet of the chain-link fence. It keeps on rotating and moving, and a person using a white cane tripped and fell. And is there any, so my question is it mandatory for chain link fence to be replaced with boarding and an overhang, unless dust and debris will be flying?
Through you, Chair, it's going to depend on the nature of the work taking place within it. Usually we have covered sidewalk and hoarding or chain link fence on the interior side when materials are being hoisted overhead. that would usually mean that the material would be hoisted from the roadway over the sidewalk. Within the site, a lot of the time you'll see construction staging areas where they bring the trucks into the site, and then the covered sidewalk then is more just, you know, for juice coming off a concrete bucket. Because the idea with that is that if anything comes off of the crane, it falls straight down, and it is already confined to the site and not out over public highway. As far as the maintenance of the site protection, you know, that's something that that you know, whether it's transportation services, they're called TSOs, Transportation Standards Officers, patrollers, anybody who's city staff out there in transportation who sees an open pit excavation that's not protected should be stopping their vehicle and going in and saying, hey, you guys need to attend to this now. That's and as far as it being a trip hazard, yeah, I mean, those types of situations can't be allowed to persist longer than they're being first noticed and then immediately addressed.
I spoke to the developers of that site, and they took no action, and then I took it to the councillor, and it's been replaced with boarding. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rohima. Stephanie for questions.
This may sound like an odd question, but do you have any jurisdiction over city property, like what's going on underground here at the parking lot, City of Toronto? No. Okay. It's a perfect example of what not to do. It's a mess down there. No clear signage and such, so.
Yeah, Stephanie, thank you. Councillor Davis, questions? Oh, Martin, sorry, Martin. Martin, I apologize. Martin and then Councillor Davis.
Hi there. I just had a question about how to get the information to the people, because one of the things, of course, you've addressed was that, you know, it's kind of difficult to get that information out there. But I was wondering if you had ever envisioned having newsletters or some social media such as Twitter or Facebook, and so that even better would be to get a database where you could put in your postal code and you could get a list of what is being developed around your area as well. There's just a few things that I think would probably help, but I'm just wondering if that has been looked at or not.
Through you, Chair, to my knowledge, no, it hasn't been, but I'm happy to take suggestions, and we can discuss internally within Transportation Services. There is part of the new congestion management plan is to take advantage of and make use of new and emerging technology to get the information out to more people in a more timely fashion, in a more usable way. So we would have to look at every option that exists, like the ones that you're suggesting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Davis.
Okay. My first question is a general one. Is this unit being established with a priority for congestion management? Or is it intended to make sure that the construction management sites and plans and sites are also pedestrian compliant?
Through you, Chair, it's both. I mean, it's not one over the other, and so within there will be two separate units set up within this. So one unit will be specifically and entirely dedicated to construction coordination and ensuring within you know, existing legislation, the new mission statement, the guidelines, principles, that as you're suggesting, that those pedestrian issues are brought to the fore. And when we review the construction management plans, et cetera, that, you know, I think one of the recommendations from Walk Toronto was to widen the width of those temporary sidewalks from 1.4 to 1.8.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I know
no,
that
it's not one over the other. They're separate and both.
And of equal importance, because I hope it's not just about moving cars better.
No, absolutely not.
So the second thing is about, what I don't understand is if we receive for a road occupation permit, the layout that's going to be used, this book 7 says if there's going to be, that it must meet the AODA requirements. So you must get plans. Why would you issue anything that does not meet AODA requirements?
Through you, Chair, I'm not certain the degree to which those are reviewed against that at the moment. That's happening in the district offices, and that's something that we'll be addressing.
You don't, we.
I understand.
The corporation.
Yes.
Don't know if road occupation permit applications and temporary control layouts are being reviewed for their compliance with AODA.
They're being reviewed.
I hope that that's the very first priority. The second is if they're not, there must be someone to assist, or there must be police. Is that correct?
If you're not
a flag person. I mean,
if you're not, so I've seen some instances where sidewalks would be closed mid-block. You simply don't want persons coming down the sidewalk mid-block and then being told sidewalk's closed, go to the other side. There has to be somebody there to facilitate that safe crossing and stop the traffic. If it's more than one lane, a police officer is required instead of a flag person.
All right, so but in your answers to the other person, who do I call when I encounter this situation? This says there must be somebody there, and you've just said there must be somebody there to assist. So I presume the police officer or the flag person or whomever is there to assist someone safely to pass that construction site.
Yes.
Is that the expectation people should have?
That's the expectation they should have, yes. Now, I think in the instance this morning, I'm not sure that there was a planned closure. It was just something that was there blocking their way.
No, I'm asking in a planned closure.
Planned closure, yeah, absolutely. There has to be somebody there. You can't just arbitrarily close a sidewalk mid-block and say, good luck.
I'm not even talking about having it closed mid-block. I'm talking about where it's narrow or where there's a hole and somebody's just about to fall in the hole, or where it's unsafe. Generally, should we expect that the police officers are going to assist in those sites? Because quite often, and what is frustrating watching them is they're talking, looking at the construction sites, enjoying the weather, which hasn't been so great. Is it an expectation that somebody could say, please help me get past this construction site?
Yes, and for a signaler, so that would be a person assisting vehicles in and out of a site as a second set of eyes for the driver, a flag person, or a pay-duty officer on site. They are to be provided verbal and written direction as to what their responsibilities are.
Okay, so when we have anyone getting any kind of permits for the right-of-way that require that kind of person on site, do they know their expectation is that they're to assist people?
When we have the construction site meeting with the constructor and transportation staff, it's made clear that they're there to facilitate safe passage, and that it's the responsibility then of the site super to make sure that they're performing those duties in connection with that construction.
How do we know they are?
We don't.
So are you looking at ways to increase the accountability through the permitting process to ensure they are meeting their requirements?
I mean, we want them complying to all the permit conditions that they're given.
Then how do we know they are or are not?
There are supposed to be routine inspections by TSOs, by work zone, persons driving by that, you know, if I'm going by and I see.
You've used the word supposed to be. And
yes,
what I'm asking
I have.
is, how do we know? Is it documented? Are there reports?
The documentation would normally.
Boxes?
Sorry. The documentation would normally be in the form of complaints with respect to non-compliance, Councillor.
There's such things called KPIs that we're trying to insist on
Understood.
contractors, and we should know and measure keep data. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Anyone else with questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, let's just have a conversation about that. Who would like to speak? Monica first, go ahead.
Hi. I want to thank you for coming out today, and you are the front person for a lot of frustration, and so, you know, don't feel like we're attacking you. This has been a long time coming. I remember one of my first things with the Accessibility Committee was a presentation on the fact that I was blocked completely from getting to work because of a new construction site. And so I really hope that this new committee that's coming together in November will work really closely with us to make these things happen. 311 doesn't work. There has to be another way to deal with this. I can give examples of calling 311 and telling them there's an accessibility issue. They're taking down the information, and I go back the next day and nothing has changed. So, you know, there has to be a known way of getting this stuff dealt with. There has to be an understanding by the construction people that, yes, their life is rough and gruff and they have a lot of stuff to do, but they really have to pay attention to this sort of thing. I want to thank you for being here. I want you to understand that we're all frustrated with the system, but we're really willing to help change it, and we've done it many times with many different things. So while we maybe seem to be on the attack, I just really want to say that we're happy that something's moving forward.
Sorry, my okay. Thank you very much, Councillor, for being with us today. Wendy to speak, and then Martin.
It's really more of a suggestion. I think the, you know, you can see, obviously you've seen and you've heard about the barriers that people are coming up against. And when we were talking earlier about who do you complain to, I really think it would be helpful to have something that is coordinated and that people are aware of in terms of, you know, at a minute's notice, you come across a situation that you really cannot get around. You know to look for some kind of a poster, or, you know to look for a person that has some kind of a designation that you can go to that you know will support you at that time in trying to get around that situation. So honestly, it was completely new to me today to hear that a police officer, as Councillor Davis was saying, should be a person that you could go to and say, I can't get around this barrier. You know, making that kind of information more broadly known to this community would be very helpful. As Monica was saying, calling 311 and saying, you know, I was trying to get somewhere today, but I can't get there, does not get you any closer to where you're trying to go.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Martin to speak, and then Glenn.
I just wanted to add to that, actually, because I've been dealing where I live with the Crosstown construction, and the first thing I did was call 311 and then realized that Crosstown actually has a direct number. I called them, and things started moving very quickly. So if we could have a centralized number like that for other projects, I know this is a huge project, so I understand, you know, the dynamics, but if we could have something similar, so if you could take a page out of their storybook, that would be fantastic.
We don't generally allow for the back and forthing, unless you feel like it's absolutely material and it will silence everybody else from speaking. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
On all city projects, there are similar boards posted that provide project information and project contact information if there's any you know, difficulty, but that doesn't address the seeing impaired.
No, it doesn't, but thank you for that comment. Okay, Glenn.
It sort of further speaks to what you just mentioned, but a suggestion would be if there were a more simple language. A lot of those, the city posted items are full of a lot of different kinds of information. Were there a separate one that was sort of a construction site 411 for really quick, simple to read information. If you spot non-compliance, call, fill in the blank. If you need assistance with, call, just those couple keynote things by way of a pedestrian or service user, I guess, for lack of a better word, 411 for the people that are passing through that space. Yes, I mean, there are the things for sign variances and zoning changes and the permit numbers and all that. It's all needed to be there, obviously, but a separate posted sign, perhaps in a bright, noticeable color that stands out from the rest of the signage, that's quick reference info, just by way of suggestion.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And Martin to speak? Oh, Michael, sorry. My apologies, Michael. Please go ahead.
I'll just make two really quick comments. Number one, just off of Glenn's comment, you know how they have like the old sort of building development signs? They were really technical, lots of wording, and I know the city has worked towards sort of streamlining it. Something very similar to what Glenn was saying, very easy to read, very streamlined sort of signage so people know who to call and who to contact. The other thing that I've noticed as well, especially with some construction sites, is that, it's difficult to sort of navigate your way around, but I've noticed that on some of them, particularly on Eglinton, particularly on Yonge Street, where you've got some of these condo developments, what's happening is that the contractors with their trucks are going over the sidewalk, basically completely destroying the sidewalk though. And I don't know if there's any necessary way to sort of prevent that, but you would almost think that presents a barrier for people with using a mobility device where, there's suddenly these huge gaps in the sidewalk. So I'm just wondering if there's like a better mechanism to try to prevent that type of damage.
Thank you very much, Michael. Anyone else? Final remarks? What I'd like to do is move a motion. This is motion number 6 here. I'm just going to read it out loud. That the Executive Committee direct the General Manager of Transportations to review the comments in the letter from Walk Toronto and report to the Toronto Accessibility Committee in the first quarter of 2019 on the feasibility of implementing the recommendations. And staff, thank you very much for your presentation. As you've noted with the number of questions and also the remarks, this is an issue that is really quite important to this community. I am very discouraged by some of the responses, and it's neither here or there right now, but I'm discouraged by the responses because I thought we had gotten further ahead than where we are. To be quite honest. In Ward 27, I know Emily was commenting about Church and Carlton. The sidewalks there were already substandard to start off with, less than 1.5 meters to begin with. The construction site made it worse. By the time the building is complete and the construction is complete, you're going to have much broader, wider, improved pedestrian realm and the piazza that's in front of it. This is a common occurrence at every construction site, whether it's institutional builds like the courthouse or perhaps residential towers. What will be revealed afterwards is generally better than what was there in its current condition, but during the interim period, it certainly is very, very messy to the point that it's inaccessible. We do individual efforts, different communities to advocate for more accessible construction sites, but it's not system-wide. And I think the challenge that I see in the report that was, or the presentation today, is that there isn't quite the strategy for the system-wide proactive implementation. It should not be left to the community to respond to complaint, because quite honestly, if universal design and complete streets was incorporated in everything we do, even during the interim process of construction, we shouldn't have to call to complain. Having clearer communication will certainly be helpful, but it's by my observations, we have to turn the paradigm around and make sure that it's purpose-built with accessibility in every single step of the process, including a spectacular public realm that's going to be unveiled when the messy construction site is finally brought to a close. 6-meter sidewalks is what we aim for in downtown Toronto now with every single new application, and 10-meter sidewalks is the vision for Yonge Street of the future from Davenport to Queens Quay. that is going to require a lot of construction. I would hate to think that during the construction period, everything is closed and it's messy for everyone, especially when we know in other cities it can be accommodated. So thank you very much for the presentation and for the remarks. If there's no other speakers, maybe we can just vote on the motion. And all those in favor, thank you. Any opposed? That carries. Thanks, Eric, for your, thanks and congratulations on your new post. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we have two final items. I think we have two final items. Yeah, we have two final items. I believe they're fairly quick. Deidre, you've been so patient with us. Thank you. Deidre is here to provide a presentation for DI 19.7, Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, outstanding 2017 agenda items.
I may need some IT support just to hook up here.
Andy, can you come out for us?
It is, but it's not. Hi, what am I doing wrong?
We just have to hit the VGA button.
Oh.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. I couldn't see if there's because of the big table next door. No, I'm just kidding. So you're good to go?
I'm good to go.
Your mic's good? Yep, there you go. Perfect.
Okay, thanks. So this will be really brief. But this was a motion at our last TAC meeting for me to just give a brief update on outstanding items. So I just went through the 2017 decisions made by TAC, and I'm just going to go through the Toronto Sidewalk Cafe Design Manual. We already spoke a little bit about this, and as you all know, on December 4th, it was referred back to staff. And it will be coming, we're expecting, a councillor addressed this in her briefing. Then the parking permits, was also already addressed, so I will keep moving on. But the province has been doing a review of all of the parking permits throughout the province and have consulted with all of the municipalities, and we're expecting to hear back from them. So disability issues related to policing in Toronto, that was approved by executive committee and adopted by council. We are still waiting for the Toronto Police Services Board to respond to that. And I can follow up with the Toronto Police Service Board to invite them to the next TAC meeting. This is also, the next item is the City of Toronto public appointments process. And this is outstanding in that the city clerk will report to TAC annually. They have agreed to report to TAC annually and actually would have been here today, but our agenda was too tight. So they will be coming on June 20th to report back. And as you know, we worked with public appointments to appoint and have 2 new members. So they have been very involved with supporting this committee. The private ramps on public right-of-way, that was in September. Council adopted in November 7th, 8th, and 9th. Work is currently in progress on this, and we are expecting an update in the 2nd and 3rd quarter. Some examples, and they presented on the 27th about some of the challenges that they are facing with licensing and with the ramps, such as the stopgap ramps. And I will also invite Transportation Planning to give us a report at the next June 20th TAC meeting. And on December 4th, we decided, the TAC decided to request a presentation from our information and technology staff, and that was adopted, and we are expecting a presentation on June 20th. I have been in touch with staff from information and technology, and they want to come and talk about the new website. And Those are really that's all of the outstanding items. There were some other updates that I know people are in the committee are interested in. The employment accessibility at the City of Toronto, it was adopted, and the decision is that TAC is to be consulted prior to Human Resources submitting reports to Executive Committee relating to hiring of persons with disabilities. The festival and events funding program criteria was adopted by City Council, and city staff are working on developing that process, what that's going to look like, and how that's going to work in terms of ensuring that anyone applying for funding for a festival and events is including accessibility plans. And finally, the multi-year accessibility plan, it's not outstanding, work is being done, and I think you'll see that the policy, which is the next item on the agenda, is a big step in that work that needs to be done. So that's it for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Deidre, thank you very much.
I tried to make it quick. So.
You did wonderfully. Any questions for Deidre? No? Okay, thank you. Anyone to speak? Okay, go ahead, please, Stephanie.
Just quickly, I want to thank you for the update, because sometimes we don't know what happens, and it really makes a difference that we are making a difference with the work we do, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
It was interesting. It was actually, it was a good exercise to follow the decisions and how they flow through the system. It was quite interesting, actually.
Okay. Anyone else with comments? Okay, I'd like to move a motion, and this is to try to avert the black hole of City Hall where motions and good intentions are moved and adopted and they disappear forever. So we want to resuscitate that sidewalk for all campaign around the Toronto Sidewalks new bylaw, the new guidelines, and this is a motion that Yin, I'm going to be saying. This is again inspired by Yin, but also I made reference to the letter that came from the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association. So I'm just going to read it out loud. That the Executive Committee requests staff to expedite the studies requested by the Joint Committee of Licensing and Standards and the Public Works and Infrastructure Committees on the Toronto Sidewalk Cafes on December 4, 2017, so that this research can be conducted in the summer months of 2018 when cafe enclosures are in place, and that staff can report on the results in January or as early as possible in 2019. I think that this committee, who had been very active in that campaign, will probably share the concerns that we don't want that report to disappear forever. We know that the city staff who worked really hard on that report worked very diligent to bring balance to the discussion, and I think that there was some very legitimate concerns that perhaps that report would disappear and not come back anytime soon. So our request is just make sure you bring it back, and let's not delay this any further. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. The last item is, and Deidre, thank you. Our last item is DI 19.8, City of Toronto Corporate Accessibility Policy. I originally held it for Emily, who's left, so she's no longer speaking. Are there any questions of staff, because we're not receiving a presentation? Okay. Seeing none, it's pretty straightforward. You've actually seen an edition of the report. Not to mention the city staff have been in consultation with the Employment Working Group Committee as well as the Communications Committee. So if everyone is okay with it, can I have a mover to adopt the recommendations and report? Okay, I acknowledge Michael first, sorry. Michael, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So good work, everyone. That brings us to the end of this very full agenda. We did go half an hour over, and for those who stayed with us to finish the agenda, I want to thank you. We have one more meeting to this committee, and that's The June 20th meeting, so that'll be our last one. We'll see if I can find some money to squirrel away to maybe provide a lunch, because we wanted to provide some celebratory. We thought we were going to celebrate at the end of the sidewalks for all campaign. It kind of dragged out. We did provide some food, but many of you were not there, so I'd like to try that again, and that'll be for the June 20th meeting. So bring your stomach at that time. And of course, we have the National Accessibility Week that was proclaimed by sort of federally, and we'll be proclaiming that week at the City of Toronto as well. So you can watch out for that, starting on May the 29th for 1 week. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Meeting adjourned.